Well, sick. What's up, you guys? Welcome to the stream. We're going to be talking about tuning rotary cars because it is a mystery to a bunch of people, and I'm wanting to demystify what we have going on. So, I'm going to be honest with you, for the most part, this is going to be kind of winged. I have an idea. I have an itinerary up here as well in front of me, so I have an idea of what we're going to be going over and a general idea of what are we talking about. But what I'm wanting to make this is more of a free-flowing conversation with everybody. So if you have any questions as we're going, feel free to ask them. What I will ask in particular, though, is that if you have already seen the form for the Google form that you got in your email, if you got an email, use that as well. If not, there is a Q&A above for the chat that you guys can check out as well. Just put questions in there. Now, I will not be looking at those questions until after we are done. So when we are done going through the first portion, which is setting up the base map, going through everything, then I will look back at the questions. So if you have questions, please put them in the Q&A form, because I am honestly not going to be looking at chat, and I don't want to be talking to chat at the same time in particular, because if I do, I will be sitting here talking about a specific subject that is off topic from what we're wanting to look at for way too long. So I have an idea. I have super bad ADHD, so bear with me here. Like I said, I do have an itinerary and things like that in place, so I can keep myself mostly on track. But just understand I'm a little bit scatterbrained. And also, as well as that, this stream is on about a 20-second delay. So if you ask a question, I will not see it for about 20 seconds afterwards. So if there's any problems or anything like that, I'm not going to know it until after about 20 seconds. But I am actively watching the chat while we're talking. So what I want to do first, take about 10 minutes or so to talk about what I have going on, what's been going on. If you're a follower of the YouTube channel as well as that, I'll be answering some stuff about that in the long term, as well as, if you haven't noticed as well, I have McKee Power pretty much branded everywhere at this point on the stream, what we're doing, etc. So I wanted to go ahead and take time to explain that as well. So first and foremost, if you've been following on YouTube for, I want to say, 10 years or so is how long the YouTube channel has existed for Rotary stuff. Kind of took a break. I switched over to the Honda stuff, and I've been working in a shop called Humble Performance, specifically working on sport compact drag racing cars and street cars, so Hondas in particular. And I kind of stepped away from the Rotary scene, and there is a enormous reason why I stepped away from the Rotary scene. In particular, it was mainly just the toxicity, and then on top of that, just dealing with the car as a whole. So I jumped over the Hondas to really be able to jump into being able to do stuff for a little bit cheaper and have a little more fun, being able to have a car that runs all the time, being able to learn the race and stuff. So jumping over to that community has actually taught me a lot of things in play. And as I've come back around to the Rotary scene and looked at more and more stuff, I've just found that there's still a lot of misinformation as far as how tuning works. I just find that there's people that are perceived thought leaders that are not remotely close to being qualified to becoming thought leaders in that regard. There's a lot of things I have to say. I'll just leave it at this. I think that when it comes to tuning, there is a right way to do tuning, and then there is a correct way to do tuning. Now, I'm advocating for doing things the correct way. So what I'm going to be doing with this stream in particular is explaining to everyone how to do things the correct way and how to justify and understand what you're looking at if you're dealing with the right way. So we're going to be doing it the correct way in this tutorial and talking about how it all works. So the main focus for this is going to be talking about building a base map out. And we're going to be talking about literally from beginning to end, setting up the base map. And I'm going to be going over some hints and tips in that process as well of setting up a base map as well. So we're going to be able to do that. And while I'm in here as well, I'm seeing the chat isn't moving too much. I want to see who all's in here. So if you're in here, just let me know in the chat below where you guys are coming from, where you're from, what's up. I'm assuming you guys heard this at Facebook RX7 group. So if you're here, let me know where you're watching from. I'm really curious. I saw some people were here from Chile when I was looking at the actual sign-up forms and things like that as well. But I want to know who all is here and where you guys are from. So put it in the chat below just so I can see what's going on. And if you aren't able to chat, you need to be subscribed to the YouTube channel to be able to chat. And I highly recommend that you do that, because if you do, you're going to be able to see the next stream. This is going to be a series of streams set up in particular so you can understand how to do things and teach how to tune and etc. So I've been thinking about how I'm going to be able to distribute this information correctly, and this is kind of a trial run for what we're setting up. So if you have feedback, whatever, afterwards, be sure to leave it there. I know ahead of time, but I already talk very quickly, so I apologize for that ahead of time. I just have a lot of things to get out. My brain just works at 500 miles an hour. So it might be hard to follow sometimes. But if you have any questions following up after this, be sure to hit me up. You can hit me up on Facebook. You can do my website, mckeypower.com, which will be available here roughly pretty soon. Honestly, it's available. I just haven't turned it on yet. I'm going to be selling parts. So I'm doing this all for free. I have no business incentive, honestly, to do this in particular, contrary to what most people might think. And what I'm trying to do is honestly just get it out there for everyone to be able to look at. So I'm trying to make the information as open source as possible. I'm not looking to hold anything back. So if you're interested in learning something today and you want one-on-one consultation, we're going to do it as a group. We're going to have group therapy today because I know we're dealing with a lot of stuff with the Rotary stuff. We're going to do a lot of stuff as a group. So I want to be able to answer your questions. And then potentially the idea is that if you have a question, I might be able to answer a question someone else might have, or a question someone might not even know that they have. So being able to do that is going to be very important to this. So I want this, like I said, to be a two-way conversation and go from there. Now, I will ask that if you are interested in tuning stuff, or if you haven't purchased like an ECU, for example, or wanting a turbo, whatever, my website will have that stuff available. So if you don't have a Haltech Elite, which is what we're using in this tutorial today, you'll be able to purchase that from me. Even if you want to get it from the website, you can DM me directly. If you don't, no big deal. I'm not asking for any donations. I don't want any donations. I'm doing fine Honda stuff. I would like to do Rotary stuff and educate and things like that too. That is definitely a goal of mine, but that is starting with this. So I want to say thank you to everyone coming in here. I've been watching it. We've been getting messages from people that are saying they're coming in. We got Asheville, North Carolina, Philly. We got a guy from Reddit from Germany, so that's really cool, across the ocean. Colorado, Northern Illinois, so probably Chicago. New Zealand, really cool actually there. Virginia, Wichita, Kansas, not too far from me. I'm located in Tulsa, Oklahoma. Another New Zealand guy. Hong Kong, we got Guam, Ryan Ramirez here. I actually helped out with his car. Santiago, Chile, so there's my Chile guy I was talking about. Colorado, New Orleans, Texas, but he's in Okinawa, so JDM as fuck. Austin, Texas, Atlanta area. Hayden Parker, I'm in the TJ area. Cool. So I'm seeing that everyone's here. Everyone's kind of tuned in. It looks like everyone's kind of in. We're about 69 people. We had 150 sign up. I was expecting about 30 to 50 in general, and I imagine we'll see that kind of fall off as time goes on. And what I'm doing right now, like I said, I'm going to spend about 10 minutes talking, and then we'll actually jump into the meat of the thing. So I'm just kind of getting everyone settled in, let everyone kind of file in. So if this sounds like me just kind of rambling for a little bit, yes, that is what I'm doing for the first 10 minutes while everyone kind of comes in here. So don't worry, that is not the rest of the thing. We got Kyle Larkin in here. I know Kyle Larkin. So yeah, we got a lot of stuff going on. And what I'm going to be doing in general, like I said, to kind of recap what we have going on, is I'm going to be explaining top to bottom, building a base map to get your car started from the beginning to end. So if you have any technical questions, while that's just happening, like I said, because it's on a 20-second delay, it's going to be particularly difficult for me to be able to immediately answer a question. So if you have a question, relegate it to the Q&A that I put in the chat above, and I will check that afterwards, and we'll come back around to that in particular. It's just going to be very difficult for me to answer the question. Like I said, if I have to try to answer the question while I'm in the middle of it, I'm going to get sidetracked. So I just don't want to get all sidetracked at all. I want to be able to just get through this all and go through. And honestly, I'm going to ramble quite a bit as we go through. So believe me, you're going to get enough of that from me. And I might honestly answer your question in the process. So hopefully that works for you. My goal here to make this is as comprehensive as possible. We're now up to 75 people, which is really great in particular. And like I said, if you're just joining this, I'm spending about the first 10 minutes. Just let everyone kind of get in, get filed in, get situated. So if you don't have your drink yet, grab your drink, grab some popcorn, grab whatever. We'll get going here in a little bit. But yeah, so the reason that this seminar is becoming a thing in particular is because I was talking to Phil Sohn, who's the organizer for DGRR, and I'm really interested actually in participating and helping that event in particular. I was actually going to go to DGRR this year, and it just didn't work out. I had a tune in the middle of the scheduling, so I wasn't able to leave. But I was going to go to DGRR and kind of, scope it out, whatever. But having talked with Phil Sohn, he's actually wanting me to jump in and give a seminar in person at DGRR, so Deals Gap Rotary Rally out in Tennessee, I think, or Kentucky. Do a live seminar and kind of do this. So what I'm trying to do is kind of structure it and figure out where we're going with that in particular. So that's kind of what this is. So because we're doing that, I wanted to kind of get an idea of what topics I need to be covering as we're going through this. So like I said, this is going to be a two-way conversation. I'm really interested in hearing what you guys want to hear about, what you're wanting to learn about. No question here is off limits. I will answer anything and everything that I can. I have no problem saying I don't fucking know. So if I don't know, whatever, I'm not claiming to be the final boss of knowing everything about tuning. I'm not claiming anything along those lines. What I'm wanting to do is be able to give someone or anyone that's maybe looking for a question to be answered a one-to-one consultation for free for $0. Do it live with 70 plus people now at this point. So that way everyone can kind of learn, and we can all learn together and grow as a community together. Like I said as well, I'm not looking for any sort of compensation, anything along those lines. I will ask though, like I said, if you have not bought, say, a Haltech Leader, or Haltech Nexus, or anything along those lines, and you're looking for an ECU, check me out. If you don't know anything and you necessarily just kind of want to get like an idea of what's going on with the car, you can certainly watch this as well. I do offer remote tuning services as well. So if you're interested in having that and you kind of, want to whatever, this will be available as well. And I know some of you guys are wanting to learn how to actually tune. I know a lot of you guys are actually wanting to know what you're looking at in the tune as well. So I am catering it to both of these crowds in particular at the same time. So I guarantee for a fact by the end of this, you're going to learn something you did not know in particular. But yeah, so we're getting ready to get started here. We're about a minute away from getting started. So what we're going to need here is going to be doing this in the Haltech NSP software in particular. So that is the new Haltech software. By new, I mean about 2 years old at this point, or 3 years old at this point. So you should already be acquainted with it in general. But if you're not, I'm going to be walking you guys through it regardless of how it's all set up, how it all works, etc. So don't feel like you need to know anything going into this, to be honest with you. Just understand that we're going to be going from bottom to top. So if something seems rudimentary when I'm explaining it to you, I'm speaking to everybody and trying to teach everybody at the same time. So we can go as simple or as complex you want. The real complex part of this, if you want to know complex technical answers, whether it's drag racing, road racing, some weird problem you're having with your car, put that in the Q&A in the chat. So that way I can answer it later. I'm not going to be answering questions midway through talking about setting up the base map. I will be answering those afterwards. So your question might be answered in the process, but if it is not, I'll go back through and I'll be answering them. And I also have a bunch of questions from the Google form questions that I sent out in the emails as well. Those are all there. So now that we're there and whatever, I'm going to go ahead and close the chat. So I'm now no longer looking at chat. It's really cool to see how many people we have from everywhere and who all is actually want to participate, etc. Hopefully we're going to make this a big thing over time. That'd be really cool. Well, let's go ahead and jump in. So I'm going to set the ground rules here. First and foremost, like I said before, if you have a question, put it in the chat question at Q&A that I have put in the chat. Answer the Q&A there. I will not be answering questions while I am talking about setting up the base map. Today's topic will be setting up a base map from scratch, from beginning to end. I'm going to be covering this both as a FC kind of situation and FD situation. So I'm going to try to cover both cars as we're going. To explain, I'm going to be giving you some general ideas as far as numbers go, what you should be looking at, how you're going to be good at judging everything and what we have going on. So this entire thing, I'm targeting about 45 minutes. And then after that, we'll do Q&A, and I will answer every question that is submitted. So as long as it takes. So that means if we get 3 hours worth of questions, I will answer 3 hours worth of questions. I don't think that's going to happen. But if it does, I will 100% answer every single question to the best of my ability. That means that if I cannot answer the question, I will let you know that I cannot answer the question. I will not pretend to know under any circumstances, but I'm pretty confident that I should be able to answer most questions. And the reason I'm doing this live as well is because I think it's really easy to Google answers and post on Facebook and act like you're an expert and have no actual tangible experience, which is what I have seen and understood. So being able to answer these questions on the fly is just demonstrably a way to show that, for one, I know what I'm talking about. But secondly, to give you direct feedback on what's going on. So if you have this question, like I said, put in the Q&A. The Q&A is the part I'm really looking forward to. The seminar part is whatever, but the Q&A is what I'm wanting to answer as many questions as possible there. But what we're going to see, like I said, is be going through the base map stuff. And the reason I'm saying we're putting the QA at the end is because if we do it in the middle, I will get stuck on a topic and I will not stop talking about it on accident for hours. So that's why we're doing that. We got Puerto Rico in the house, Thailand, a lot of people across the world, honestly, which is kind of shocking to me. Yeah, it's actually really cool. I'm actually very, very, very impressed, very humbled in that regard that so many people want to learn on top of that. So, yeah. So let's get started here. Like I said, there's a right way to do things. There's a correct way. We're going to be doing the correct way to set everything up today. So let's talk about starting up the base map here. What I'm going to do is I'm going to go over here to my picture-in-pictures view. So now we have the Haltech NSP software open. You got me in the bottom right-hand corner. Everything's going on. So we're looking at the software here. We're on the Haltech NSP software. This is the Nexus software programming software available that you guys are able to use for your ECU. Now, it's really cool to walk through, etc. We're on the main page here. And then on the left side, I can't see my mouse, so it kind of sucks. Maybe I should have done this a little bit better. I might fix it later. Who knows? But basically, all I'll say is we have this. We have our menu here. So on the left side of the screen that it's going up and down so you can kind of see the stuff is we have our main menu. Now, once you have an idea of the general layout, you're able to understand how everything works here. I like to personally use the search bar more than anything, so I'll use the search bar a ton. But all your stuff is here. So we have these divided up sections. What we're going to do is go section by section, breaking down how to set up the car. On top of that, I'm going to lightly touch on some of the general ideas as far as how everything goes. I'm wanting to dedicate an entire seminar alone to VE and ignition tuning by itself. So I'm going to give a quick cursory understanding. If you want to know more about a very direct question of that, you can ask that in the Q&A. But we're just going to kind of go from there. So what I have open right now is the Series 6, the RX7 single turbo Haltech Elite 1500 map. So this is the base map for that car. So we're starting from that. And if you don't know how to open up a base map, it's going to be under File, Open. And like I said, I'm sorry you can't see this. I should have set this up a little bit better. And honestly, I might just change this in a second. Under Base Maps, under the folder, you have it there. To be honest, that's exactly what I'm going to do. I'm going to go ahead and change this over. So let me add a display here for this as well. We'll do a display capture for this. Hit OK. And we're going to do actually, hold on, a display capture. Sorry. I need to do I forgot what this is called. Is it a window capture? No, it is a display capture. Yeah, okay. So I need to do display capture. Sorry, now we're fucking going through the weeds here. Display capture, select display capture. Cool. And then I will do that and then hit this. Cool. All right, so we got this all open here. I'm going to do it like this way. Okay, that's the wrong window. We will, I am making this way worse. I just completely fucked this up. Already, we are starting off strong, you guys. Very strong. I literally fucking just rescaled this entire thing. Let me put that back there. Here we go. All right, there we go. Now we got that here. I'm going to go ahead and lock that image in place. I'm going to put this down here underneath that image, underneath this as well. Lock that in place there. All right, now let me scale the actual window up so we can see that a little bit better. All right, now we're working with portals. So now we can see my screen here. So File, if we want to open a base map, File, Open. And then we're going to be in the Documents folder, Haltech Maps and Data Logs. Base Maps going to be the folder name. And we're going to find the Mazda folder, RX7, and we'll go from there. So all these base maps have pre-assigned pinouts for all the jumpers that you're using for your plug-and-play jumpers. So this is going to be your S6, so your FD. So the FDs have a plug-and-play jumper available. So you have S6, X7, and S8, Series 6, Series 7, Series 8. All those base maps are available here. And we have single turbo and twin turbo as an idea as well. The twin turbo, if you're running sequential twin turbo, can only be run on the 2500s or the Nexus S3s because they have additional outputs that need to be used. They use the additional injector and ignition outputs for controlling the solenoids required to run the sequential twin turbo system. But if you're using a single turbo setup, choose the single turbo map. And then they have base map, fuel map stuff set up for that stuff as well as the injectors. And if you're using something like an S5, so like an FC or an S4 FC, all the stuff's available here. That being said, these pinouts are dedicated to the plug and play, not plug and play harnesses, the harness that Haltech sells. So you're going to be using the pinout from that. And if you need to reassign the pins, you can do that there. So if you're buying a harness from someone that makes harnesses, you're going to need to adjust the pinout from there. And I will walk you through setting that up as well, partially, so you get a general idea of the concepts in play. But what we're going to be starting from here is the Series 6 single turbo setup of an Elite 1500. Now, you're going to notice something, and I'm just going to show you a trick from the beginning. This is going to be the first hint and tip I'm going to give you. I opened the base map. Now, the issue with the base map is, if you look up here, Elite 1500 ECU, version 3.0.0.0. Now, this is the initial NSP firmware that was released with the actual NSP software when it released. So the problem with this is that there was a lot of bugs when this actually released originally. So we're not going to use this actual map here. We're going to actually create a base map using this base map is what we're going to be doing. So because we're doing that in particular, we're going to actually need the GUI file new, and we're going to do an Elite 1500 here. You can do the same. This is the same process we're using an S2 or an S3. Elite 1500 there new, and we're going to select the 3.11.3. I think the actual firmware on my software clearly is not updated. It's 3.12.2. You're going to select whatever the newest version of the firmware is. You're going to click OK. So it's going to make a new map. This map's going to be completely blank. So it's going to have a completely different engine setup, completely different trigger setup. It's going to be completely blank. It's going to be completely new. So right now, this is effectively starting from scratch. So because of that, what we're going to do now is we're going to hit File, Import to bring all that data back in, Base Maps, Mazda, my RX7 stuff, since we're doing a Series 6 single turbo, the Elite 1500 one right there, which E1500 at the end is going to determine the file. So we're going to be bringing an import file or an import setup here. So because we have the import here, this can allow you to import individual tables, wiring selection, all that stuff too. Now I am able to select all the tables I have, which includes all this as well as the wiring assignments as well. So if I have sensors that are all wired however I want to have that as well, and it'll pull, in this particular instance, we're using the 1500 plug and play jumper base map. It'll pull the base map stuff for that, as well as the pinouts as well. If I don't want to use the pinout, if I have, like, say, a custom harness, for example, I can deselect all wiring selections. And when I do that, then I have all the wiring pinouts open, so I'm able to actually reassign all the sensors to the actual harness that I have. But because we pretend like we're using the default S6 base map jumper, we're going to use select all wiring things. Now up here, vehicle information, I'm not going to import that because I'm going to show you how we're going to set this up, because it has to do with the navigation structure of the actual Haltech NSP software. But now that I have it set up, I can now hit import selected items. Upload all will upload that, as well as the vehicle description, the vehicle name, etc. Import selected items will only import these selected items. So I'm going to hit that import selected items. It's going to give me this prompt. So I hit accept. It's just like EPA stuff. This is all set up. So I'm going to see this all set up. You're going to see these red things. We're not going to worry about the red stuff right now. We're just going to look at what we have here. And the red stuff will also be indicated up here in the top right-hand corner, which you can't really see, I'm sorry. And the warnings indicator up here, you hit the warnings and it'll show me everything's going on. So I can see there's no vehicle name. O2 control bank 1 is the O2 sensor is not set up. Oil metering pump is not assigned. The stepper output is not assigned, etc., etc. So because that stuff's not assigned, we're going to have to actually go back through and assign it. And that has to do in particular with the firmware situation that we're dealing with. So because we're using a newer firmware, some stuff gets lost in translation between the two firmwares. And what Haltech recommends, what I also recommend, is that if you're updating firmwares, do it in small increments, because if you do big ones, it can completely mess up your map. Particularly, it'll mess up your fuel, mess up the axes, whatever on the fuel, and can really jack everything up. So when you upload or you import upload, make sure you're going back through the map and looking at your axis. And by axis, I mean the left side here. Look at this, and look at the left to right here. You're gonna look at all this stuff here. So because you're looking at all this stuff, we want to make sure this is all looking the way that it should. So we have our target lambda axis is cool. Our base ignition, our base fuel map is cool. Really looking at your base fuel and ignition. So under ignition tuning here, your base as well. So make sure all this stuff looks normal. And by this, I mean your axes, because this will turn like 133 number increments, which will look wild and not make any sense. Just make sure that's all correct. Some of that all imported. What we're going to do is our first step here. So top left-hand corner of this navigation menu will be vehicle information. We're going to change the vehicle name of the car. So for this, I'm going to call it FD RX7 base map tutorial. So whenever I do that, what it does is it creates a new folder in particular to that thing. So let me save this as base map here. So when that happens, I now inside my Nexus map and data log folder have a folder called FDRX7 base map tutorial. So in there, I've saved the base map. It's all in there. So it's all saved in that folder. So everything I'm going to do with my car from this point will live in that folder. Whether I'm saving the maps, when I have data logs, my data logs will also be saved to the folder called logs inside there. My logs that are saved from the actual car itself will be saved to the auto logs folder. So if I'm wanting to reference data logs, I'm going to need to go there. Furthermore, a really cool thing is that in this top right-hand corner is your data log icon. So if I click this icon, I can then navigate to the folder here, and there'll be a logs folder. If I click the logs folder, it'll bring up I'll click that, I'll select the folder, hit that. It'll bring me up and populate a list of every log that's in that folder. And it'll show me the max RPM in that log as well as the max boost pressure in that log. So if I'm looking for a log where I did a pull and the car made a ton of boost, or I want to know for sure that I'm in a log that has a ton of boost, I can then use those data points to understand which log is which and go from there. It really gives you an idea of where everything is. Makes it a lot easier to go with. We're going through the very basics, how the software works, and we'll start jumping into stuff here. So I want to talk about some stuff when it comes to tuning cars here. When it comes specifically to tuning Haltech and VE, there's three major, very, very, very important things you need to make sure you get right every single time. And this is stuff that gets missed a lot, and it drives me insane. And this is something that I harp on. You're going to want one, get your engine configuration needs to be correct. Now, being a rotary, they're all going to be typically the same displacement, so that's not going to be as big a deal as it will be for like a piston engine, for example. You want to get all your fuel system settings correct. It is extremely important that you have everything on your fuel system correlated exactly to how the car actually is doing in real time. And three, you want to get your fuel injection stuff set up. I said three. Sorry, the fuel is that stuff. So your fuel injection settings need to be set up correctly. They match exactly what's going on with the car. And then the third one, or the fourth one at this point now, your trigger settings need to be set up 100% correctly, because trigger settings can destroy an engine if your trigger settings are not correct. And trigger settings are your crank angle sensor settings, your distributor settings. They need to be set up correctly in the software. So when we're talking about that stuff, the ECU will be commanding ignition. I've seen this be confused by some people. is that when your ECU is commanding ignition, it is commanding ignition relative to what the car is actually doing. So what we're doing when we're setting up our trigger and our timing sync in particular is we're setting up our base timing sync to the ECU. So if I have a base timing sync set up correctly and I'm commanding 15 degrees of ignition timing, the car then is commanding 15 degrees of ignition timing. However, if I have my base timing off by 5 degrees, so it's 5 degrees advanced in this example, and I'm commanding 15 degrees in the same example, the car is actually running 20 degrees, but the ECU thinks they're running 15 degrees. And there's a huge issue with that because 5 degrees advanced is a blown up engine. Like, you don't want that to happen. So we're going to be going through steps of setting this up and make sure that your base timing is synced up correctly. And that's why I'm saying that trigger settings are extremely important to have done. So let's go top to bottom here. So top left-hand corner there is going to be our vehicle information. Our favorites, we're able to save tables to the favorites in top left-hand corner. Then we have our ECU information as well as the firmware release version right here as well. So getting our first step here, engine configuration. Now you'll notice that there are top level menus and there are sub menus, and then underneath those menus, there's also sub menus. So there's menus underneath, so it's a tiered navigation structure that I'm able to actually go through in multiple ways. So you need to make sure and understand that at the top level, there are settings at the top level of the navigation structure. So engine configuration is going to be here. So our engine capacity, being a 1.3 liter or 13B, will be 1.3 or 1300 cc, depending on what your units are in this particular. So if you're wanting to change units under preferences, units, I can change everything here. So all my units right now are set to kind of a mix. So my injectors are pound per hour, I'll set this to liters or cc. My pressure is PSI or inches of mercury. I prefer PSI, inches of mercury. Some people might prefer KPA or absolute KPA. Absolute KPA is going to be 0, is going to be absolute vacuum, whereas KPA is going to be negative 100 is going to be absolute 0. 100 will be atmospheric. 0 will be atmospheric. Negative 100 will be absolute vacuum. Distance set to miles. AFR, leave that as gasoline. It's a good idea to know this in Lambda, but I'm going to use gasoline for this example. Temperature of the Fahrenheit. Engine volume is going to be liter. I'm going to change that to cubic centimeters. And all my stuff's going to be set up here. I'm not really touching that stuff. It's not really relevant to the rest of this. So engine capacity is 1,300 cc's or 1,300 cc's or 1.3 liters. Engine type, if you're doing this from scratch, you need to make sure this is rotary. And it's very important that this is set to rotary because rotaries fire ignition and everything. The whole engine cycle is based on a 360-degree rotation. Whereas a piston engine that says 720 degrees, that means that a piston engine, because it's a 4-cycle engine, will fire once every crank rotation. Each cylinder will fire once every 2 crank rotations, every 720 degrees of the crank. We need to make sure this is set correctly. If we don't, the rotary is going to then fire basically half the faces the entire time. So make sure to set the rotary, because rotaries, when people say like 2 strokes, this is what they mean, is that they fire every crank rotation. Every 360 degrees of face is firing. It is displacing 650 cc's of air every single crank rotation, whereas a piston engine is not firing the same cylinder every single time, etc. Make sure you have this number of cylinder rotor. It's going to be 2 or 13B, 2 rotor. Make sure that syncs up correctly. Aspiration turbocharger. Now, this setting is confusing for some people. This has to do with your map prediction or your transient throttle settings in the ECU. You don't really need to fret over this too bad. If you set supercharge, it will change the way that the transient fueling strategy works. So because of that, if you have a supercharged car, for some reason a rotary car, make sure that's set correctly. But turbocharger and naturally aspirated, you're not going to see a huge difference between the two. Maximum cranking RPM is going to be the RPM that the engine switches over from knowing that it is cranking to knowing that the car is running. So when the car is cranking, we're going to be referencing the cranking ignition and fuel table. And the second that it flips over that RPM, it's going to switch to the actual base ignition and base fuel tables and all the corrections there and start applying the engine start corrections. The engine start parameter will basically say, okay, the engine started, and it'll start the timer after the engine start. Engine running time will begin. So this is the number that switches over. You're not typically going to need to change this over 380. I'm just giving the idea of how this all works relative inside the ECU. So underneath the ignition configuration menu, we now have trigger settings. So trigger system can be very important here. So if you use the base map, it's kind of the default settings for this already put in there to run whatever car you're running. So since we have the FD3S, we need to have that there. Now you need to understand as well is that just because it says FD3S does not mean that this is the FD3S setup or it's not going to run the car immediately. This is the actual very important setting, which is TDC angle or your TDC offset. TDC offset is what we do for our timing light sync. So we're going to sync our timing light using this number right here. So this is going to let you know, basically it's telling the computer to compensate the timing based on this number. So if you put the timing light on it and you see that it's 5 degrees advanced, you're going to add 10 here or add 5 here, and it's going to pull it back 5 degrees to where it syncs up to where you want to have the numbers on the actual crank and the numbers of the ECU that match 150%. If they do not, you are going to have major issues. Especially if you're not dyno tuning the car. If you're dyno tuning the car, that's not necessarily as important because the dyno will tell you where the timing is. But rotary engines being the way that they are, where you don't really want to push the timing through the roof to quote unquote optimize the timing, you want to make sure that you have this as close to accurate as possible. Now, your trigger signal settings, these typically are not going to be changed. The FD trigger is in fact falling edge, which means that it pulls to ground, which means that when you look at the oscilloscope, you're going to see the actual, when the oscilloscope cranks over, when it goes past a tooth, the biggest change of voltage is going to be up to down. It's going to be down the up. Down the up be rising, up to down is falling. So because that, it means we have a falling edge trigger. So that means that, like I said, as a tooth passes the magnet or the sensor, where these are reluctor sensors, it is going to pull to ground, and then the ECU will know that it's pointing to ground, and it'll then compensate based on that. Now, if you're running something like an FFE trigger wheel with a Haltech sensor, where it says sensor type here, we're going to make sure this changes to Hall effect. Now, this says custom. Custom really generally means reluctor setup, or a sensor that has a magnet or a sine waves kind of sensor. The reason you have custom here is because custom allows you to change your trigger activation and arming voltages, whereas if you use reluctor settings, you only get arming voltage. So arming voltage is when the sensor starts listening for the tooth switch over, whereas the activation voltage is then telling that. So activation voltage by default will be 0 if you have just reluctor on, but if you have this on, you can then change the arming settings. This is very important for low RPMs and reluctor sensors because they tend to read a little bit odd in certain situations when it comes to trigger activation. So when the car is running low, the voltage, the offset in the voltage actually is significantly smaller because the voltage actually picks up as the voltage of the car changes, as the alternator comes online, etc. The actual reference voltage changes completely at the sensor itself. So sometimes you find that when you're cranking cars, if you get cranking trigger errors, you might need to adjust this. That being said, with the default settings on an FD, typically these work fine, and you're not really going to have to really touch them. But if you get in a situation where you're going to need to, this is where this is all going to be changed, and that's why these settings are set up to custom in real time. So you're going to want to do that as well. I see Kyle Larkin put a message. I assume that, I'm already getting off on that. That's my fault. I assume setting TDC offset incorrectly will also throw off the injector angle, which I know is supported. Yes, 100%. So everything you're doing, everything has to do with crank angle or calculated off the crank angle is going to be relative to your TDC offset. So if your TDC offset is correct, everything's going to be based off that. What you're telling the computer right here is where TDC is, where the engine is top dead center. And when the car knows that, it then calculates everything. Again, goes back and calculates everything based off of that. So it's based off a 360 degree crank rotation as well, not a 720. It's based off 360 degrees on the rotary engine. And a piston engine, it will be based on 720. So it gets a little more convoluted than that. So we're going to only stick to rotary because it's a rotary specific class in particular. But yeah, it is based on 360 degrees. We need to make sure our TDC offset is correct there. It is very important. Like I said, it is the fuel injection timing and the injection and the ignition timing is the exact same. So yes, and Kyle, yes, I agree 100%. You're saying syncing the TDC equals telling the ECU the engine where it's supposed to be, not only relevant to ignition. 100% yes. Injection timing is a little bit beyond the scope of what I'm trying to talk about at this moment, just because it is a little bit more of an advanced subject in particular. But that being said, I'm not going to shy away from talking about that, but just getting over the hurdle of what we're talking about right now, we're just going to deal with just talk about ignition timing, because that's going to be the way more important situation as far as blowing up an engine versus fuel injection timing. Fuel injection timing, you're going to optimize the car, make more power, whereas ignition timing literally will blow up an engine very quickly. You're going to see here as well, we have the TDC offset angle table enable. So this table is also very important because with reluctor sensors, what we see is that the timing will walk a little bit back and forth. And this table is meant to compensate that. So this number is a modifier of this number. So what you're going to see is that when you run a car and you start revving the RPM up, as the RPM comes up, since the voltages and the sine waves are moving just a little bit, just because reluctors are pretty sensitive to voltage changes, because that's happening, the tooth is going to move ever so slightly as the voltage moves in a lot of situations, specifically with reluctor sensors. If you have an FFE Hall effect sensor, you're probably not going to see this happen. It's not going to move too much. And if it does, it's not going to be super major. But reluctor sensors, like you can see here, it's set up to offset -7 degrees. So you can be up to 7 degrees off. So the way you're going to tune this table in particular, which is beyond the scope of a base map setup, but it's good information to know regardless, is you're going to let the car run, and you're going to rev the car up with the timing light, with the timing locked, or run the car up through the RPM range, and make sure the timing is not walking away from where it needs to be. This is going to scale pretty linearly with RPM, so you're really going to have to tune just for RPM. So as the RPM goes up, the voltage goes up, the speed of the actual trigger goes up as well. So then you're able to do that. So what you're going to do basically is go, okay, if I were to have this table zeroed out, for example, the way it is right now, and I put the light on it and it's locked and I'm at 0 degrees and it's, perfect dead on at 1,000 RPM, but I rev the car and hold at 5,000 RPM and it walks back 4 degrees, what I'm going to do is add 4 degrees in there. It might be the other way around, but you're going to basically set this number to where it syncs up 0. So you want this thing to be 0 across the entire rev range as you sit and rev the car up. It's important that you do this because, like I said, on a reluctor sensor car, the timing is going to walk forward or backwards. And when that happens, is that if you're targeting, say, 15 degrees and the timing walks advanced 7 degrees and you're targeting 15, you're now running 23 degrees in that situation. That is engine blowing up situation. That is very expensive. It can cause a major problem. So if you're running a fuel like pump gas that is extremely timing limited, you make sure this table is set up. And this is a major problem that a lot of rotary people had and deal with and don't know about in particular is this table. I've even talked to several people who I would consider well-respected in non-rotary situations that know about this table. So this table is set up to basically zero out the walking. You're going to use this to compensate for timing drift. That's the entire point of this table. That's something I should make a video on in particular because it's a little bit difficult to explain in text. But yeah, so typically you're not going to be touching these arming voltages. And like I said, this kind of goes beyond the scope of what we're dealing with. So I'm not going to really touch on that. Derivative filter is an important filter to have as well. This is a millisecond filter that basically determines how fast the RPM is. So if you see your RPM is a little jaggedy when it's supposed to be stable, you're going to adjust this as well. Like I said, one of the other things that is very, very in the weeds, I'm going too far into it. I can already feel it, that this is going to go longer than the 45 minutes I projected. So I need to speed it up a little bit. So let's talk about the next most important thing. We're going to talk about fuel system. Fuel system settings are extremely important. And the reason they're extremely important is because that's how you're going to get your accurate VE map. And I'm going to let you in on a really dirty secret when it comes to turning VE cars, because this is one thing that I laugh about people in particular that talk about how hard these cars are to tune, etc. And I'm just going to go ahead and remind people again, if you're coming in here new, is that if you have a question, put it in the QA in the chat above so I can reference it later. Because if I don't, I'm going to get super sidetracked on everything. I'll come back around and answer every question. Until every question is answered, I will be here getting this done. So if you have a question, put it in the Q&A. That way I can come back around to it. I see Johnson's asking a question below. I just don't want to answer it and have this Billy habit. So just put it in the Q&A below. So we're talking about fuel system. The reason you want to have fuel system be correct, and the dirty secret about VE tuning is that once you have a VE map, typically for an engine in general, it'll run almost every engine imaginable, to be honest with you. It's really dependent on your fuel system settings and how your fuel system setup is tuned up. That being said, things like intake resonance, intake speed, injector sizing, dead times, things like that can definitely affect your VE. But in general, what you're going to find is that once you have a general idea of the shape of VE table, no matter really what engine it is, you're going to find that most cars will run between 5 to 10% in that range of needing adjustment. It won't be like 30, 40, 50. It's not going to run extremely lean, especially if your O2 control settings set up correctly. It's not going to run way the fuck out. It's going to run pretty close to dead on. And really what you're going to find is you're making incremental changes. And when you learn more and more about tuning these cars, is that when you start seeing big changes or big things being off, it's going to indicate an actual issue with the car. And this is going to give you the ability to diagnose things way faster. One of the big things and big criticisms I've had against the people that I've been talking about in particular is that they cannot diagnose themselves out of a fucking wet paper bag. And this is why. They don't understand how these things work in correlation with each other. That's why I'm spending this time to really break down how things work at a fundamental stage. Because once you get it figured out, you'll be able to identify issues immediately if you know how VE works relative to all these settings. And I'm walking these big 3 settings I'm talking about. Because if you have all these settings set up correctly and they're correlating correctly to the engine, they will immediately indicate a problem if there is a problem with the car that you are tuning at the time. So we're going to make sure to get this right. So we have our sequential ignition stuff here. So most FEs you run 2 primaries, 2 secondaries. That's all going to be here. If you're running tertiaries, like a excessive manifold, for example, you can set this up at 3 stages and set that all up. So staging method here is important. Since we're using the original base map set to elite style, you're going to change this to Nexus style. So elite style what it does is you have a flow rate table that you're able to actually distribute how much percentage the injectors are distributing fuel individually. So we can, let's say, hey, our primaries want 25%, our secondaries want 50% or 75%, and it'll split the injectors that way and it'll go up. The problem with that is, and that when you see people complain about secondary transitions, is that it comes from that. If you don't have the correct percentages coming in the right way, it can get kind of funky. That being said, the Elite style doesn't necessarily do that as much. It's more talking about old school kind of like the Platinum kind of situation. But the Nexus style, what it does in particular is you set your maximum duty cycle you want the primaries to go to. So if I want my primaries to run only 50% fuel injector duty cycle before I have the secondaries come on, I'll set the 50%. And what happens is the primaries run up to them run the 50% injector duty cycle. When they hit 50%, the ECU will hold the injector duty cycle at 50% of the primaries, and then it'll turn on the secondaries. And it'll bring the secondaries up until 50%. And then once they both hit 50%, it'll raise both injector duty cycles at the same time together. The reason this is superior to everything else is because it makes tuning secondaries thoughtless. You literally, as long as you have your secondary and primary injector data correct, you turn that on and let it go and let it work. Now, there is a very important consideration to have in terms of these RX7s as well, is that they have the secondary runners. Since they have the triple throttle bodies, they have the secondary runners, and then the secondary runner activation that's pneumatically activated or that's vacuum activated. You need to make sure that you do not have those secondaries coming on before boost comes on. Those secondaries turn on when boost comes on. And if you turn on your secondaries before boost comes in, you're going to be injecting fuel into a runner that is not getting air. And when that happens, the fuel will not get in the fucking cylinder or inside the rotor. It will not fire. You'll have fueling problems. So you want to make sure that you have your primary injector duty cycle set high enough to where it's only switching over the second or bringing secondaries online when the car is in boost. If you do not, like I said, you'll be injecting fuel into a runner that is not receiving air, and you will have more additional issues on top of that. You will not get fuel inside, atomized fuel inside. It'll pull up. It'll cause a bunch of issues. So make sure that when you're setting this up, that you have your primary thing set up. And I'll get to that when we get to the actual injector setups. Primary fuel density, you don't need to touch this. Don't even think about it. Just leave it there. That's going to be more if you're tuning high-end stuff like nitromethane or weird mixed fuels. That's sometimes it's irrelevant, but honestly, even then, it's not that big of a deal. Injector dynamics or injector diagnostics, you can run this. I honestly never touch these. But what this will do is it'll set up engine protection. You can set up engine protection methods based on, say, injector duty cycle. So if I have my injector duty cycle over 90%, I can set that as well. If I have issues with injectors, say I have a customer that puts low impedance injectors on a high impedance injector driver, I can have this stuff set up where it's like, hey, motherfucker, pay attention. You put the wrong injectors on this car. You didn't set up your injectors correctly. This will tell you and let you know. It'll do a short circuit check to make sure, and also make sure your wiring is correct with your injectors. So your wiring for the fuel injectors is actually a relatively new feature in the Nexus. You don't need to touch this. If you are running your injector output on a relay, for example, it's really cool to have this here. A really cool trick you can run as well is if you want to run triple injectors on, let's say, a 1500, you can use this as well as an injector power output. So you can have injector rails will normally run 12 volts the entire time for the injectors. But if you're running 6 injectors, you can bridge the injectors across and then use this injector power output and then have the secondaries have third stage injectors be turned on individually, and then set up your actual flow rate and dead time table based on having a tertiary set come on when they come on or when they're commanded by a generic output. Like I said, that's also another thing that is beyond the scope of this lesson. If you want to know more about that, we can definitely talk about that. Ignition system, this can be very, 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 very important, so pay attention here. If you are running the factory FD ignition system, first off, do not, if you have IGN 1As, do not plug this ECU in and key on the car with the ignition plugged in. Do not. You will immediately fry your coils. So what I would suggest is when you are uploading this map, have your coils unplugged. You're going to want to do that. It's very important that you do. If you're running stock ignition, not a big deal. You're fine. But if you are running very specifically IGN 1As, do not, because the problem is that if you have an FC, for example, or a car that's using Rising Edge, I don't know if the FC is Rising Edge, it doesn't matter. If this setting is set to Rising Edge, one will give you warning. It actually did not used to give you warning. I did not know this warning was here. It did not used to give you warning, but most coils are falling edge, and falling edge means that to fire the coil, it pulls to ground. In a Honda distributor situation, which is my bread and butter, Honda distributors fire high side, which is a rare situation. So what they do is the igniter fires when it's 12 volts. When it sees 12 volts, it fires, and when it sees ground, it doesn't. So what's happening is at falling edge, the ignition output or the igniter output is sitting on 12 volts, and then when it fires, it pulls to ground, and it constantly pulls ground. That's when it's firing. So if you have it backwards, it'll be sitting on ground or it'll be sitting on, and then it'll fire when it goes high. So the problem with that is that a coil will just be on the entire time and it'll smoke, and you'll let out the smoke. The hidden smoke that you can't put back in the coil, unfortunately. So you need to buy another coil. So you need to do that as well. Trailing edge, so you have individual activation as well, but you're not going to change this from falling edge. So leave this on falling edge. But like I said, for safety, and when you're updating firmwares, have your coils unplugged. It's very important you do, because if you don't, it might default to the wrong edge and it might fire the coils in accident. Dwell time, very important. These default dwell settings will be fine for OEM coils. If you're running IGN-1As, I would target anywhere between 5 to 4.5 milliseconds. You can also scale this by a boost in RPM, which some people do. Typically in boost, 4.5 is going to get you there. If you don't know, you need to know the calculation basically for duty cycle. IGN-1As, this is very particular IGN-1As. If you have stock coils, don't touch this. IGN-1As have a maximum rated duty cycle of 80%, and they have a maximum continuous rated duty cycle of 40%. So you will need to do the calculation for duty cycle, which I have to fucking think about it off the top of my head. I don't know off the top of my head. I have to look at the numbers. It's like divided by 600. It's like RPM divided by 600 times dwell time, and then you compare your duty cycle. You need to have the duty cycle for if you're running road course or a situation where you're always at high duty, you need to keep it under 40%. If you don't, you're going to overheat coils. You're going to end up, Soccer says the math channel, that's Drexel, Mike. But if you do IGN-1A, this is why I don't want questions. I completely fucked myself up. The IGN-1A is at 4.5. If you go beyond, if you're running high RPM, dwell time is relevant to RPM with duty cycle. If you're running a road course car, drift car that's being at high RPM the entire time, you need to make sure that your dwell is going to be underneath the appropriate duty cycle, underneath that 40% number. If you don't, you're going to overheat coils, you're going to melt stuff, you're going to get misfires. Make sure it's under there. If you have a street car where you're going out the street stuff, or maybe doing drag racing stuff occasionally here and there, you can go up to 80% and be fine. It's really like if you're going to be basically running the car at high RPM for, I'd say, over 20 seconds, I would recommend going under that 40. You can definitely go over the situation you can, but you really shouldn't go over 40 as much as you can. When you start doing that, you start looking at CDI boxes or additional boxes as well on top of that. So yeah, we barely gotten through these settings, so I really need to speed up. So let's talk about sensors. Very important. Manifold pressure sensor. So this is going to be great for FD guys, Civic guys, or RX7 guys. Civic people, Honda people, we use our OEM map sensor, so we wire them to an analog input. But for FD guys, you guys normally will run a vacuum line from the intake manifold to the actual ECU itself and use the integrated map sensor in the ECU itself. But if you're not, let's talk about this. This will be a general concept. I'm not going to go over assigning sensors after this. I'm just going to do this one time. So if you're interested in setting up like your oil pressure sensor, your fuel pressure sensor, this is going to apply here. So under input type here, it says it's onboard pressure sensor. I'm going to change this to analog voltage. And what this means is it changes it to an analog input on the ECU itself. So if I were running, say, a 7-bar map sensor, like a stainless steel 7-bar map sensor, if I'm running like a cubic fuck ton of boost in my car, I can set it up as an analog voltage input. So what I can do there is hit assign, and then from there I have all my analog inputs assigned here. So since I'm able to do that, I can then look at the pinout for the Haltech, for example, and then select the correct input from the ECU. So let's say I wire it to A2, I can set up there. I then have my pinout assigned to A2, so my map sensor would then be wired to A2. And then from there, if I want to calibrate this map sensor, I then click the top end menu, map manifold pressure. I can assign my voltage to the pressure values. So if you get your calibration sheet, whatever, it'll have it all there. Typically nowadays, most map sensors are all the same sensor. They're all Honeywell fucking the same sensor. That's whether you're getting the Haltech sensor, the AEM sensor, Holley sensor. Basically, they look like a certain specific way. The stainless steel sensors, they're all the same sensors. They just have different logos on them. They're all going to use the same calibration. You can use map, and then it's all going to be here. So if I want to use a 7-bar calibration is there. So it's all set up. The sensor is then calibrated. And like I think Mike just said a second ago there, you can use the onboard for barometric corrections, which is 100% correct. So if you are using an onboard map sensor, you can then use if you're using an aftermarket map sensor, you can use the onboard for barometric, or vice versa. Or no, you can't, because it's in the fucking manifold. So never mind. Yeah, you can do it that way. So that's set up there. So manifold pressure, you're typically not going to touch this, but if you needed to set up for an aftermarket sensor, that's how you do it. Intake air temperature sensor, if you're using the OEM sensor, which most people are in this case, you can use that there. If you're using the Haltech 200 sensor. You need to set that up using their suggested settings. But most people, once again, in this situation are also using the OEM sensor. But if you want to calibrate that temperature sensor, you can do that as well the same way you were doing the other sensor. So so the sensor calibration works the same way across every sensor. You're going to set them up that way and go that way. So I'm not going to spend too much time on setting that up. However, I'm going to add, if you guys are running fuel pressure, oil pressure, which a lot of you guys are, I highly recommend that if you are tuning a car, that you do use a fuel pressure sensor. You'll click on the top of a menu and hit sensors and go down and find the, we'll say fuel pressure in this situation. I'll find the fuel pressure sensor. I'll hit that. Fuel pressure is now open. I've then set up the fuel pressure sensor the same way I would before. In this situation, I use a pressure. Usually they're all the Bosch 150s. It's going to be 0.5 to 4.5, 0 to 150 PSI on the sensor. And once again, I'll go to my wiring settings and there, hit assign it to the pen that's on the ECU, and my fuel pressure sensor is set up. Now, the really cool thing about the fuel pressure sensor is that the ECU uses fuel pressure here to calculate our fueling in real time across injector pressure differential, which is something we will talk about in a little bit. So that's all there. And then on top of that, if you have like a generic pressure sensor, whatever, you have a bunch of generics and things like that, a little bit beyond the scope. Let's go ahead and talk about the next most important part, which is going to be our narrow band or wide band. So if you're using, which I recommend, the WB1, the Haltech wideband, you're going to go ahead and delete the narrow band, which is useless. Don't fucking use that to begin with. Wideband 02, you have that enabled. You'll see the wideband pops over here. Now, if you're using the WB1, you're going to get the CAN controller. So if you're using a WB1 via CAN, you're going to enable that WB1, go to the Haltech CAN system. Now, you're going to have two systems here. You're going to port auxiliary or the main connector. So the auxiliary port is a connector on the front of the ECU, and the main is going to be if you have it wired into the harness itself. So if you buy an aftermarket harness that has a CAN connector in the harness, you're going to select main connectors. If you connect the WB1 to the front part of the ECU, you're going to use aux CAN bus port. That being said, another important thing to know about that is that the front port on the ECU is not powered. It is technically, but it is not powered enough to run CAN accessories. So if you are wiring the wideband in, you need to make sure you're wiring your 12-volt to an external 12-volt power. You can wire it straight to the ECU power, which on the Elites is A26, and you can wire the ground to A10. You're going to want to do that 100%. Or you can wire it to an individual power ground. It doesn't matter. That's all set up. And once that's done, you're good to go. You didn't do any more calibration on the actual wideband itself beyond setting up your engine protection settings, which we'll get to in a second. But if you're using something like an AEM UGO, for example, you can use analog voltage right here. So I'm using an analog like an AM UGO, an X series, for example. We'll set that up. And it's the same way as calibrating another sensor. The wings I just went over earlier, you do the same exact thing. It's the same exact process. It's super cool. Let's talk about engine protections. So engine protection is super important. And this is one of the most important engine protection steps, especially for a new tuner, if you don't know how VE numbers work. And I do it by default anyway. You should do it no matter what. Engine protection. So what we want to do is we want to set up lean protection here. And what we're doing here is we have all these minimum settings. So we have minimum RPM, our precondition, our delay time, and our DTC severity. So since we have that all set up, what we can do then is hit precondition. I usually use both. So what this basically says is you don't really need engine protection for lean protection until you are at load in the car. During cruise, idle, to be honest, the car can run as lean or as rich as it fucking wants. You're not typically, I'm going to say typically as a caveat, going to break an engine under cruise or idle when it goes lean. It's not a big deal. You're going to just notice it drives like shit. It's not going to be super dangerous unless it's way, way out. So you can set that up here. So minimum maps can be the minimum amount of boost pressure we need before the actual thing starts listening for lean, which is going to be sometimes the situation where cars spin or they bog. The O2 might go a little bit wonky for a split second. So this is kind of compensating for that, or like tip and throttle. You don't want to necessarily aggravate if you have like a little lean spike on tip end. You don't want to do that immediately. So you have this all set up here. You also have delay time. So we have minimum TPS. I'll use set this about 75, 80% like this. And I'll set my minimum map like 10 PSI, 5, 10 PSI. Basically, when I know the car is going to be wide open throttle and it's going to be needle looking, that's when I set it. Delay time is going to be how long the actual value needs to be over your wideband maximum value before it will trigger a DTC, which is a check engine light or engine protection. So level 1, 2, 3, I have 3 levels of engine protection. We'll go over that. That's beyond the scope of today, but I can set the DTC severity for any setting that is for sensors, diagnostics, etc. I can set that for anything. So it's all set up there. So wideband maximum here. And this is where I'm going to show you guys a trick that I have seen fucked up so many times, or people just don't even know. And honestly, when I talk about the power of Haltech, this is why I love it. We have wideband maximum. So what this says right now is that our engine protection goes, once you're over 4,000 RPM, over 7.3 pounds boost at 75 75% throttle for 700 milliseconds if our wideband value is over 13.0 to 1 AFR gasoline scale. If it's over 13.0 for 700 milliseconds, it will then throw our engine protection code. Now, that seems pretty straightforward. I don't want to be over 13.0 if I'm targeting 11.8, whatever, for example. Now, the problem with that is that if I'm running a car with boost by gear or anything along those lines, and I'm running the car like that, I'm not necessarily targeting the same AFR for every gear. So I need to be able to have my engine protection for wideband O2 scale against what I'm targeting. So the way I'm going to do that is I'm going to right-click on the wideband maximum table, hit table access, enable the access. I'm going to hit select, type in target lambda. Target lambda is going to be my target AFR for the car. So now I'm there. I'm going to be targeting 11.8, 10.5 in some cases, 12, 13. So I've been built out this axis here. So I have that all set up and do 14. So I have all these numbers here. So then what I can do is actually set up my O2 when it will trigger the O2 protection based on my target lambda. So I'm targeting 10.5. I can then set, okay, if it's 11.0 for that time, go show it's lean. 11.8, 12.5, 12.0, 12.8, 13, we'll say 14. And then at 14.0, I want to do like 55. It doesn't even matter. I can set that max lean. So what this is do basically is like if I'm running 30 pounds of boost, I'm going to want a different air fuel ratio than I am at like 10 pounds of boost. So I can have this scale. And the cool thing about this is as well is that this could basically be a copy paste setting for every single car you tune. Because once you set it up here, you'll never have to touch it again. You throw it in there and then the car will always be ready to go as far as engine protection goes for your wideband O2 engine protection. But yeah, to have this there makes it more flexible and modular for setting up cars because once this is set up, you can literally, whatever you target, it'll be based on that. So it's a really cool thing to have there. So we'll go back here a little bit. Coolant temperature, fuel temperature, knock detection, very important settings to have. Rotary engines, very important to have knock protection. That being said, I don't know how much I would reliably trust it. In some cases, like for instance, knock detection will show obviously when a car misfires or anything along those lines. It is important to know, especially if you're doing pump gas, you have knock protection. I strongly recommend people run ethanol and everything. But yeah, knock detection, it's pretty much pre-configured for a rotary engine, so you're not going to have an issue. A 20B engine, the frequency is going to change. So you're going to need to modify that a little bit. But it's not going to be a ton. To be honest, it doesn't really change because it is the same cylinder size, same everything. So you don't really need to worry about it too much. Just understand that it might change the value. So you want to know that the car is in a situation where it is knocking. And make sure you know for a fact the car is knocking. That being said, being a rotary engine, you don't want to do that to begin with. So truthfully, and the reason I'm saying knock detection is not that big of a deal is that once a rotary engine knocks, it's too late, to be honest. So knock detection, it can definitely save you in some instances. It is a good idea to have on, but I wouldn't be super stressing over it. If you see knock, definitely start pulling back. But then sometimes engine noise by itself can cause that by itself. But yeah, like I said, if it knocks, you will know. No matter what the knock tells you, you will know. Okay. This is why we typically run rotary engine ignition timing very, very conservative anyway. We don't even get it near the knock threshold. Okay, so brake pedal switch. You can leave that on. It's a good thing to have. Power steering switch, clutch switch. So power steering switch is going to determine the idle control. So if you have an ISC, idle control valve, important thing to have. Same with the clutch switch for like flat foot shifting, launch control. It's a good thing to have. Now, if your car doesn't have these, to delete these functions, you can click on the setting, right-click it, hit disable brake switch, done. I see someone made a post there that's about don't forget to clear the wiring assignment. Once you disable the sensor, the wiring assignment no longer applies. So you don't need to disable it when you don't need to clear the wiring assignment when you disable it because it will not. It'll automatically assign it from the assignment. That was not the case in earlier versions of NSP. That has since been rectified. So if it is in a function that is disabled, it will not matter. So you can go ahead and just disable a function with it still assigned to a wiring assignment without worrying about it. So we talk about vehicle speed. Vehicle speed sensor, you can leave that as is. It's set up. A really cool thing to know, an important thing to know is that if you have an IC7, the FD RX7 and the FC RX7 do not send the speed signal directly to the ECU. They send it to either the cluster or the cruise control module, and then it is translated from a reluctor signal to a Hall effect signal, a 0 to 5 signal. So if you are running an IC7 and an FD, for example, and you plug it in, you're not going to get vehicle speed off the bat. You'll need to go behind the cluster, connect the input from the transmission to the output that goes to the ECU, put them together. You need to translate the signal over to a reluctor style sensor and then set the voltages that way. Same with the FC. You run it's like the cruise control module, one of the wires. That's just a little hit for later. But like I said, that's once again another thing beyond the scope. If you have that question, we can answer that later. I'm just trying to get through. I am getting sidetracked too many times. Okay, so we'll get to the next most important part. Yeah, stock speed signal on the FC is trash. That's why there's important setup when it comes to that as well. So we'll talk about fuel tuning. You can fix that FC using derivative filters. So with fuel tuning, This is now one of the other very important settings I was talking about. They get very important, very correct. So I'm going to spend quite a bit of time here on this. Tuning method, don't change the volumetric efficiency. Leave it there. There are situations when you go away from this. That being said, 99% of you guys are not going to be running ITBs, needed throttle position sensor, etc. Just leave it there, volumetric efficiency. Auto VE air temp compensation, you can turn this on, leave it off. If you turn it on, disable all your air temp corrections behind it. The ECU will handle this all by itself. Otherwise, you get weird stat corrections. I usually just leave this off to begin with. I don't really do much air temp correction stuff. Fuel type. Now, this is very important to get right. All these settings here, and if you're going to take anything away, this is what you need to take away. All settings here need to be 100% matching what's going on in the car. All these fuel settings we're about to talk about, everything on this table needs to match. So fuel type, petrol, gasoline. So if I'm using gasoline, this is going to be it. Which is going to be a lot of people. I fucking hate the Rotary people run gasoline so much, but gasoline's going to be there. If you're running E85, you're going to ethanol petrol blend, 85%, or whatever your ethanol is testing at. I would not stress over percentage of ethanol too much. So if I'm running E85, people talk about winter versus, summer blends, etc. Some places. In Oklahoma, we run only E68. There is nothing more, nothing less. It's only E68 here. There's no 85, no nothing. E85 versus E70, which is what most people's winter to summer blends are, will not see a huge enough fuel change, in my opinion, that would justify the need to stress over. So if you know that your blends are changing so much, just kind of put it there. One or the other, put it in the middle. You're going to see like a 2 to 4% change in fuel. It's not going to be drastic. I wouldn't be too stressed over it, especially with a flexible sensor. If you have a flexible sensor, even then it's even easier. But like even if you're not running a flexible sensor, I would not stress, because ethanol is so tolerant to knock to begin with that even if it is like barely lean, it's not a big deal. But also we're going to be relying on O2 control at that point to carry stuff on, which sounds like a cop out. It isn't, just because ethanol, like I said, you're not going to go so far out on ethanol between 70 to 85%. That's going to cause a major issue. And if it does, to be honest, the car is tuned way too close to the edge to begin with. And a Rotary engine, we're not doing that. We are tuning the cars with giant margins to begin with to keep the engine alive. They also don't react to timing as much to begin with. So like you don't need to stress about finding maximum brake torque and sitting on that edge. You should really be pulled back several degrees beyond that, which if you don't know what that is, we can cover that. You can ask that question if you want to know. Fuel load type is going to be estimated map sensor. You're not going to change this either. There are definitely things you can run, like say ITB situation, throttle position sensor is important there. Fuel pressure input testing map reference. So if you are running in a turbo car, you're going to be running this. The vacuum line to your fuel pressure regulator, you have some map reference. If you are running a naturally aspirated car and you're not running a vacuum reference regulator, which you shouldn't be doing on a naturally aspirated car, you change out the constant. But most of you guys will be running turbo cars, map reference. Base fuel pressure. You need to make sure this is 100% matching what's going on in your car. 100%. You don't need a fuel pressure sensor to run a car on Haltech. I do recommend it because it kind of helps override this setting. It doesn't necessarily override it, though. It does kind of help, though. This will determine your expected fuel pressure number. So if I have my car set to 43.5 PSI, I need to make sure this number is the same, or vice versa. If I have this on 43.5, I need to set the regulator to 43.5. And I'm going to set that with no vacuum applied to the regulator. So I can just turn the key on. For a trick for this, I can also just go over to engine function at fuel pump, switch the active state from low to high, and turn the fuel pump on, and then go look at the regulator and make sure the regulator is set to the exact same number that I have under here. I can set that up, and then once it's not, I can flip back to the low edge, and then I have my fuel pump turned back off, and I can do that. I want to make sure the setting is set here correctly, because a lot of your fueling and all your settings depends on this. You need to make sure this is correct. So that's kind of covered there. And we'll now go to the next table, which is target lambda. This is very, 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 very important table to get correct. Whew. So target lambda, and this is, we're going to talk about the relationship between the base table and target lambda table. So basically, your base table here, that is called fuel tuning base, is not a fuel table. This is a volumetric efficiency table. And what that means is that this is the efficiency of the air going in and out of the engine. How well the engine is taking air in and getting air out of the engine. Your target lambda is the target air-fuel ratio we are trying to make. So the way that this works, in particular, is that this is modeling the air in the engine. This is the way you think about it. It has to be modeling the air in the engine. So if my car is running in real life 50% VE, and I am targeting at this point, we'll say 15, which we're not going to be doing. This is just, I'm taking it the abstract so it's theoretical and you understand more. If I am targeting 15 AFR at this range, and I have my VE at 50%, and my car is not hitting my target AFR, I need to adjust this table to make it match. So in theory, the way this works is that if my target lambda is if my fuel is hitting my target lambda, my VE table is tuned correctly. My goal in the game with tuning fuel is to make the air fuel ratio match my target lambda table, and I'm going to make it match my target lambda table by using the base fuel map table. So if my car is running, if I'm targeting, in this example, 15.0 to 1, I'm targeting 15. I'll just make the whole table fucking 15, make it easier. If I'm targeting 15 and my fuel table is at 50%, and I'm running 14.5 to 1 air fuel ratio, and I'm running 15, I'm running a little bit leaner, I then know that I need to remove about 4 to 5% fuel, so I can hit AAP minus 5%, and then it should track directly to target. The trick to this is that if you have O2 control set up correctly and it's bringing it up to target correctly, you literally just follow O2 control and you put the same numbers in O2 control as in the actual tune. That's all you're doing. Frankly, that's how easy it is to tune fuel. And I don't know how it's a secret for people, but the reason I'm telling you that it's very, very, this is cascading effect. So I'm sorry that I'm scatterbrained here. It's a cascading effect, and the reason I'm telling you that the settings up here, it's both the settings up here and the settings down here in your fuel injectors. These settings need to be correct, because if they are wrong, the situation where I said that if your AFR is off a little bit and the ECU is telling you to take this much percentage out, if these settings are wrong, it's going to skew way out. So like if you have your injector stuff set up wrong and a car wants 5% less fuel and you do the math to get 5% less fuel and you take 5% less fuel out, it might take out 2% or it might take out 15% if the settings are wrong. If all the settings are modeled exactly correctly, the fuel will work in a predictable manner. That is why it is extremely important to get right. So I'll just harken back to a post that I made a while back about VE tables, and I had a couple tuners reply to it and say, as long as the car runs right, it's fine. No, and this is why it's not fine. Because we want the numbers to be predictable, and we need them to be predictable, because if we don't make them predictable, you are going to keep chasing your tail in issues. So when I talk about cars having 150, 180, 200% VE load, that's a huge issue. Same thing down low. If our car is, idling at 80, 90% VE or like 10, 20% VE, we have a major fuel calibration issue. And what's going to happen is that when you're tuning your car on the fuel table, when you make percentage changes, it's not going to track correctly, and it's going to be way the fuck out. And then your O2 corrections are going to go out too, because your O2 is taking the data the car is getting in from the fuel injectors and making adjustments based on that data until it gets it right. So it can go completely haywire. It's super important that you get this right. And like I said, I'm going to do a whole deep dive in how VE works in a completely different seminar, honestly, because I can go down the rabbit hole in this forever. So you want to make sure this is all set up correctly, and that's why I'm telling you. So target lambda here. We'll go back to this. And I'm going to do this from this base 15 table. Rotary engines want to idle usually between 13.5 to 14.0. So in our low vacuum area and our low RPM area, we're going to be at 13.5. Now, wide open throttle past, I'd say, about 14.5. They want to be around 11. And then beyond that, I would say, honestly, 10.5. So once you get past 20 pounds, 10.5 to 10.8 typically, we're going to run this shit rich. This is not an end-all, be-all number for anything. It's just a general idea to make sure you're not blowing your shit up while you're doing it. When you're at 0, usually 12.5, 12.0 to 1, give or take. And what we're going to do is take that and interpolate it by pressing H to interpolate horizontally to there. So we have this ideal general target lambda table there. And then it cruise in these cars. 14 to 14.5 is doable. Depending on EGTs, you might want to run a little bit richer than that. But typically, as far as a VE table goes, I would argue that what I just made in about 10 seconds is about what these cars typically want in general, and will get you going pretty quickly, pretty safely. These are pretty conservative numbers that will get you going. So 10.8 to 1 past 14 pounds is going to be pretty safe, actually very safe, very conservative. A lot of people run 11, 11.2. This is just so you're safe. And to be honest, once again, same thing. These cars aren't really affected by timing and really, honestly, being rich as much as piston engines are. So you could really run them rich and safe. If you run too rich, you start getting misfires and things like that too. This is a general idea. I personally like to idle cars at 14.0. So I'll leave them 14.0. And then I'll just have this whole thing here be 14.0 or so, give or take. And then if you want your cruise to be leaned out, you can start doing that 14.7, give or take. But generally, if you want to copy paste this will get your car running. It'll get decent fuel economy. And this would be a good, safe, wide open throttle target air fuel in general. So we have that there. And then what we're going to be doing is we tune the car, which would be another situation. We'll have that all set up there. So from there, we need to talk about something important. We'll come back to this in a minute because this is this is the biggest issue I've seen, and it fucking drives me insane. So another thing we need to talk about here as well, it's going to make your life way easier, is under fuel tuning corrections, you're going to see you have your corrections here listed. Overall correction, coolant temp, air temp, and post-start. This is a quick and easy hack that's going to it's going to change your life. Disable coolant temp correction, which sounds crazy when I just said that, but the reason I'm telling you to do that is because under post-start correction, coolant temperature is an axis. So the coolant temperature correction is baked into the fuel post-start correction. So I don't need those two tables stacking. What happens if I have those two tables stacking is that I have these conflicting nonstop corrections on top. And if you have your car tuned by somebody else and you look, if you start your car up cold and your O2 correction is like maxed out negative, this is probably why. Because the default setting here for the coolant temp correction is at cold like 46%. 48%. So we have 48% there, and then our post start, and when it's cold, that range we're at 28%. So we're looking at about a 60 to 70% correction of fuel. So it's adding 60, 70% on top. So rather than having those and try to do the math and make these both equal out correctly, the easiest way to tune your post start is disable coolant temp. And then you just worry about it here. So where you're getting that 30, 40%, you can put it here. Now the benefit for that coolant temp correction, is that if you really want to do it too, if you wanted to run the coolant temp correction and do it, you're going to see here it also has manifold pressure to scale. Zero out this table. If you find the car is running too lean when it's cold, you can start adding it in here now, but you have your base post start. So you have this base number that's working off of, and then you have another correction on top. Rather than trying to balance these two corrections out and really deal with these competing corrections that are running at the same time, you want to have just a flat base so you can work off of that, if that makes sense. So I typically just always opt to disable coolant temp correction because I don't really see load changing my fuel too much when it's cold versus hot. So I always leave it like this. This other stuff you don't need to touch too much. Flex fuel, that's beyond the scope of today. If you want to know, we can definitely talk about that. Just let me know. I just need to know what you guys really want to know. Lambda correction is going to be here. Also, I'm going to go back to this as well. Sorry, I'm scatterbrained. Under post-start correction, typically rotary engines at cold want in this area like 40 to 45, 50%. So I will start these around 45% up here. And then you're going to taper it off as the car runs. That being said, and then you can extend this out as well. As the car gets warmer, it needs less and less fuel to run. So really these numbers really apply when it's cold because the fuel isn't atomizing correctly. It's really just kind of dripping into the hole rather than being atomized fuel. So what we're trying to do is wait for the fuel to get to a point where it can actually be a vapor to get into the combustion chamber of the fire. If it's not, you get droplets, and droplets do not fire, and it causes a whole mess. So a big part with rotary efficiency and being a nightmare is that a lot of rotary efficiency stuff comes from the fact that it doesn't atomize fuel. We're injecting fuel into an intake manifold into a port, whereas the piston engine, what we're doing is injecting fuel into the back of a hot valve. Sorry, when we're in the back of a hot valve, we shoot the fuel into the back of the valve, it vaporizes out the valve, becomes a vapor, and becomes super atomized, and when it burns perfect. A rotary engine, we are literally basically we are sledgehammering fuel inside the motor. That's why we need to drop more fuel. What we're doing is it's like the same way we fertilize an egg. We're just throwing a ton of sperm at the situation to try to fertilize something. We're just throwing a ton of fuel at it and hoping that some of it burns. That's all we're doing at this point when it's cold. But yeah, I think he's saying could use lambda correction based off fuel percent instead of percent. You definitely could. The reason I'm saying this in particular is because your car might not always hit target lambda when it's cold. So we're using this table to bring it up to target lambda. So yes, Mike, you are 100% correct. And I was going to touch on that, but you're already 3 steps ahead of me. Is that we're using this table to hit target lambda when the car is cold because you're going to find that the fuel is going to change from target lambda when it's cold versus hot. So this correction is not typically tuned until after your VE table is tuned. So when that's tuned, then we come back, then we start doing cold start. But in general, it typically always start at like 40, 45, typically. But once the car is tuned, once we have the VE tune where it's dead on when it's hot, then we come back around when it's cold and we tune our cold start stuff afterwards. So that's why base map stuff's not super big deal right now beyond the scope. I would just put 45 when it's fucking cold, at least to get started so the car will run. And then when it's hot, you're going to see that. Otherwise, you're going to be chasing your tail. And if you don't know how it works, you can chase your tail, changing VE when it's cold, and then you're going to see the car goes leaner or wants less fuel when it's, it'll go rich, or want less fuel when it's hot, and you go back to change VE when it's hot, and like this table's that. So you don't want to be really tuning VE until the car is up to temperature, when the fuel is being atomized correctly, all that stuff. If you're not, you're going to be chasing your tail. So yes, Mike, 100% you are correct. I'm just trying to make it as simple as possible to get started, and then we can go in the weeds for that stuff over time. But yeah, lambda correction for sure. Once it's all set up correctly, You should be using lambda correction to be making the car richer when it's cold to make sure it stays firing. We're using this to make sure it hits target lambda. So yeah, you should be using those two tables in coordination with each other, 100%. Once you go beyond that, we now have O2 control. Now, this is a very, 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 also a very important one to know. And it's going to sound like a cop-out to some people because some people think that O2 control is a crutch. And for some cases, for sure, I've seen it be a crutch. But it's also an important tool that we can use in our arsenal as a tuner to make sure the car works correctly. Because what O2 control can do is tell you how much fuel the car wants. So instead of sitting there kind of thinking where it should be, etc., if you set up your O2 control strategy correctly, the car will literally say, the O2 control will pull the car to where it wants to be, and you just copy paste the numbers the O2 control is telling you. So proportional integral gain, PIDs are also a little bit beyond the scope. I keep saying that just because I am now 15 minutes over time where I want to be. But tuning your PIDs are important. PID is going to be your proportional integral gain. It's basically the changes per second versus changes, accumulated change over time per second. You're not going to do derivative on O2 control. So proportion to be how fast it's reacting. So if you find that your fuel is going the wrong direction, so if you need that, if it's rich and wants to pull fuel, but the car is adding fuel when it's not supposed to be, your proportional is too low. You need to raise proportional. If you find that the wideband isn't coming up to where it needs to be, it's going the right correction, but it's not going up quite. It's kind of like sitting underneath the line and it's kind of slowly coming up. Your integral is the speed at which it comes to correction. If you go too fast, the other one is, it'll start oscillating. It'll look like a fucking crazy ass sine wave. That's how you know you need to pull back. So proportional is how fast and how quick you're going to bring it up to, or in which direction it's going to switch changes. Integral is be how fast it iterates up to that point. And if you overdo it, it'll start going crazy. Once again, that's will be on scope. SCFE, these max enrich, you don't even touch these 25. It's basically max 25. And it'll pull a max 25 and it'll add a max 25. Some people bring this down. A lot of people who don't know what the fuck they're doing will actually bring these numbers way down. Because they don't set their PIDs up correctly and they deal with these cascading changes, which is what a lot of the stuff is. These are 25. Worry about your PIDs more. Long-term fuel trim. This is also another hack to tune cars, another crutch. If you turn this on, basically what it is, this is the quote-unquote self-tuning portion of the ECU. This can basically get all your stuff in line if you want to be lazy. That being said, long-term fuel trims are way less efficient than just doing it yourself. I find I can tune fuel on a cruise car within 10-15 minutes typically. Long-term fuel trim is a correction for afterwards. You can definitely use it to help tune, but it ends up being when you start calculating how much fuel you need. When you're more advanced, you can definitely do it. As a beginner, you're going to confuse yourself a lot doing this. Long-term rich fuel trim bias is going to bias how much fuel the trim is going to add based on your target lambda. So if I'm targeting 11.5 and the car is a little bit off, when it actually applies when it applies the bias, this basically is like an incremental system. It'll actually basically make it 3% more risk when it's supposed to be. So I've seen people say, well, I like Link or this because you can have it not correct as much in increments. This is how you do it. The bigger I set this number, the more that it'll increment slowly. So if I have 3%, it's going to increment to 3% off. If I have it 0%, it's going to bring it directly on. So if it's off, it's going to be off. But if it's on or it's 2%, it's going to be 2% away. And then you apply those corrections, do it again, it'll be 2% away, and that 2% margin becomes smaller and smaller and smaller. So this is how you can increment. You can have the car self-tune incrementally over time. I usually just set this, like I'll tune the car and come back and I'll set this to 0 because I want the car to be dead on, whereas this will run the car a little bit richer than it needs to be. Delay is also an important thing to have as well. I will zero out the delay past 5,000 RPM. Delay is how long the O2 control takes to turn back on after something like a transient event, a decel event, any of those lines. What happens is if you have this too short, if you have some people leave this at 0 and not know what the fuck this does. If you leave this at 0, what happens is that this long-term fuel trim table that's being populated will actually be populated with your transients. So you'll get the car wanting to add a ton of fuel, or it'll start populating the decel, it'll start wanting to pull a ton of fuel. Because it's not waiting for that stuff to stabilize out. What this does is make the setting way more stable. Also on top of that, your O2 control will be correcting for decel and transients if you have this zeroed out or you have it too short. So what this does, say transient, cool. You tip the throttle real quick. The fuel is doing what it wants to do. Great. It waits that many seconds or however long you have it, and then it applies correction after that. You want that because it'll fuck up everything. And I know Kyle's watching this. Kyle, you're tuning Hondas. All the Honda maps have this thing fucking zeroed out. If you're having problems with your O2 control on transients, this is why. So yeah, this basically adds a delay between the time that it turns on O2 control when it turns it off. So that way you don't get this weird, you don't want O2 corrections in times you don't want O2 corrections. This is what stops it. So 3 at 1 I'll simply go down to 0.5 at 4, and I'll horizontally interpolate that. And that makes life way easier for tuning and stuff. That's how you can tune your O2 control. Honestly, your PIDs and everything scaled in. This will basically make the car tune itself, to be honest. It makes it really easy. Transient throttle. Now, this is a carryover setting from the 3.0.0 firmware. We're going to remove this. We don't need that. Map prediction. Now, some people, this is a controversial thing. Some people don't like map prediction. They say it doesn't work, etc. It does. It's a machine learning algorithm. If you want to be able to dial in your transients faster, stack that on top of your transient throttle. That's beyond the scope of this, but I'm just map prediction, makes your life easier. As a rookie, you'll be able to do this faster. Let it do itself. Let it run itself. Run it like that. But like once you get more advanced, stack these two on top of each other, you can then have it dial in transients way faster if you have them both on. But usually it's one or the other for most people. Corrections, blah, 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 blah. Okay. We're not going to deal with those. O2 control, which you already talked about as well. Exhaust speeds all slow at RPM. Yep, 100%. You are correct. I think that's Dwight Charlie there. Yeah, you are 100% correct. That's why we're doing that as well. There's a lot of reasons why you want the delay on. Some people turn it off. You don't want it off. It's really calculating how long it takes the fuel to get there, as well as the corrections on top. But really, it's the corrections that are the biggest deal. So O2 control, target oscillation, amplitude. So rotaries have a really noisy O2 control because just the way their exhaust works. So you might find that your O2 control, if you have it too sensitive, will start correcting too much because the O2 on a lot of cars will be stable. Like a piston engine will be stable because the sensor is in a spot. After it's all collected, it's all great. It works super stable. Rotaries, in some case, like your big port motors, aren't necessarily stable. And you're going to see the sensor kind of do this sometimes. And when you're doing that, if you have your O2 control set up the way that it should be, the O2 control is going to be doing this at the same time, trying to correct behind it. This basically says ignore when it's doing this stuff. This is your sensitivity to those things. So if you find that it's going up and down, 0.2 AFR, you set 0.2, and it'll ignore making O2 corrections when it's within 0.2 of your target. That's for that very specific instance and situation. Minimum RPM, maximum RPM, put this below your idle, put this above your wide open throttle. People turn this off and try to go open loop. Don't run open loop. There's no reason to do that. There's really no reason. Transient throttle here will disable your O2 control when your throttle moves up a certain percent. You don't need to worry about this. This is all kind of beyond the scope, like I said, of what we're doing. I'm trying to speed this up because it's 9:20. I'm 20 minutes. I'm way low. I'm way slow, but I'm trying to give you guys as much information. Hope you're appreciating it. I'm giving you as many tricks to trade that I have as I have right now. Very important to have here, injector data. This is the single most important thing that I'm going to talk about. If you're going to take away anything beyond what I talked about before, this is the single most important thing you need to get right. And it's been made way easier by Haltech now because now they have the actual selector, so you can actually select your injectors through the wizard. So a lot of people go running ID. So if you're running ID 1000s, you can type in ID 1000 in the box, click them, it auto-populates the settings. Now here's a dirty secret that I need to explain to people because I've tried to explain this to so many people, and I get a bunch of people that say, well, I think that ID gets your data right, et cetera, yada, yada, yada. Well, I trust them. It's like, okay. Injector data is never 100% correct, ever. No matter who makes it, no matter what it's coming from, the sheet will never be dead on. And the way you can tell that's not dead on is if the numbers aren't matching your VE percentage. If it's not where it's supposed to be, the injector data is wrong. And you can tell it directly. So what you're going to tell if your injector data is correct or wrong is that if the numbers, your VE at idle, if your car is pulling about 15 inches to 20 inches of vacuum, wants to be around 45 to 50% VE. If that's a normal street port, standard port situation. If your car is wanting the idle at 20% or if it's wanting the idle at 80%, your dead times are off. And the way you can do your dead times, and a really cool way to do this as well, is that you can run the car, set your VE to where you think it's supposed to be, and then you tune your dead times to where they track to where it's supposed to be. So if I think the car's supposed to be around 50% VE, I can put 50% VE in the car or on the fuel map itself. And then if the cars turn on my O2 control and follow my O2 control, if my O2 controls wanting to pull 10%, I go to my dead time table, which if I want to see those, I can hit show settings, and then hit dead time, and then it's all here. And I select where the map is at that point, and I can hit page up and page down. Page up, page down is your incremental up, increment down. So page up, page down, like a 2000cc injector will give you 10% plus minus 10%. So if I see that my car is, and this is a big issue with 2000s, if I see my car is wanting to run 10% less fuel to hit the VE that I'm targeting, I'll then go to my O2, hit page down, and then I'll hit it, and you'll see the fuel track down there where it needs to be, and eventually get there. And you're going to kind of tune your dead times in that way to get that way. Furthermore, on flow rate, it is the same thing. If I'm at wide open throttle and I see that most cars wide open throttle be around 100 to 110% VE. If I see that my VE tracks way off at wide open throttle beyond that 100-110% range, I then need to go to my flow rate. Now, flow rate will typically scale almost directly percentage-wise. So if I want 105% VE at wide open throttle and my car is hitting 120, I want to pull 15% out, I will go to this table, hit P minus 15, enter, and then it'll pull the fuel down. So the lower the number is, the more fuel it's going to inject. The higher number is, the more fuel it's going to inject. So if I'm going rich, I need to raise the number. If I'm going lean, I need to pull the number down. And that'll get everything dialed in that way because you want your VE to work correctly. And you do the same thing with the secondaries. As the secondaries come on, you're going to see your fuel do weird shit if your dead times are off because the pulse is going to be super small. So you're going to do the dead times as well and that. You're going to see that in the secondaries. But it's not going to be affect. Dead times don't affect the wide open throttle as much. And the same thing with flow rate. Flow rate doesn't affect the idle as much. Dead times is the important factor in that situation. I saw someone mention firing angle, BT's DC stuff. The default settings for most cars will be fine for your street port cars. Bridge ports, peripheral ports get a little bit weird. They usually want a little bit less beyond the scope of right now. But yeah. So here we go. Here we're going to go to the next part here. We're going to talk about ignition timing, which is also a very important situation. The ignition timing map that's provided by Haltech is very conservative, extremely conservative, almost to the point of being dangerous conservative. You're going to see here in the low load, it's negatives. That's because the factory RX7 idles at -5 degrees of timing and runs that way super low. I like to be around the 10, 15, 20 range. It's important to be there. The reason we're going to want to be up in this range at the low load is because if you have ignition timing pulled so far back, EGTs come up. This is where situations like glowing turbo manifolds come from. Ignition timing being too retarded. So this is not the idle table anyway. Like there's two separate ignition tables, which we'll get to in a second. This is going to be there. Now the cruise stuff is going to be okay. It's roughly where it wants to be. Like it'll get you started, get you going. I'm more concerned about the wide open throttle stuff. It's pulled way back. It's way back. This is where things get a little bit weird, a little bit controversial, where I like timing to be for almost all rotary engines to start. And you can take this or leave this however you want. At about 14 PSI, I think about this. So on a piston engine, my general rule of thumb is 20 at 20, 15 at 30. What I basically do is I take that and scale it down by 5. So I'll do 15 at 20, and then honestly, I'll do like 10, 8 at 30. That being said, on gasoline, you're not going to be up that. If you get up to fucking 30 pounds on gasoline, you have a death wish. Don't go beyond like 10, 15 pounds on pump gas. 15's honestly kind of pushing it. It depends on turbo size too. You want to be there. Same thing furthermore here. I would argue that that's a little bit too aggressive too, but I would be around give or take there. But what I'll do there is I'll hit this and do that. So from here, I've got a general idea of where I want to be. So I'll put basically 15 at the 20 and I'll interpolate back to here. I'll usually put this around 27 at the 0 or 25, 27 at 0 and then interpolate all the way to 20 to there. Now this is aggressive, actually significantly aggressive. So when I get past 10, especially if you're being a new person, because there's two tables we need to talk about when it talks about rotary cars. When you go past 10, I'm usually getting under 10. I said 15. I was fucking wrong. I'm around 10. So honestly, 10 to 8, give or take, is going to be extremely safe. You can go 10 to there. So honestly, you copy paste that. That is going to be a reliable time map. Sorry, I was fucking out of my mind. I was saying ethanol. Pump gas is going to be around here. So you don't necessarily need to have a timing ramp like you do a piston engine. You can. But if you want to copy paste a timing map, this is going to be roughly generally where you want it to be. So past 10, 15 pounds, I wouldn't be over 15 degrees of timing. Even this is kind of aggressive. But this is going to be relative to something I'm about to explain in a minute for you. So once you get over 20, though, I would start pulling back, especially on pump gas. You need to be below 10, 100%. But the thing is with these, like I said before, is that ignition timing is not. Yes, you are driving me nuts. By the way, I'm trying not to respond. The ignition timing here is not super duper important. If I can't concentrate, this is why I fucked up the timing. The ignition timing, aggressiveness, MBT, maximum brake torque, is not super important. So you want timing to be pulled back. You want it to be safe because timing. This is going to kind of go to something else. Fuel AFR is not as important or conducive to knock as ignition timing is. Ignition timing is a destroyer of engines. AFR certainly does. Don't get me wrong. Timing is really what destroys things. That is how you can blow things up very, very, very quickly. So what I have here timing wise is decently conservative. Even then, even 2 degrees out, if you are feeling squeamish, go lower. You can't in boost. Not going to say you can't go too low, but it's going to be hard to break something in boost with low timing on rotary. Rotaries don't respond to timing as well as piston engines do for the most part. Even this is going to be this is very conservative, like very, very conservative as far as timing goes for a pump gas car. I'm now seeing my brain is shut off. So if I say something wrong at this point, I am sorry ahead of time. Even though I'm looking at this kind of going like, what am I saying? But now we're going to go to the next part. The timing on rotary engines works in 2 separate ways. We have our basic ignition angle and we have our split angle. So our basic ignition is our leading timing, or the lower spark plug, the one that's on the front part of the rotor. This is where things get sketch. So a lot of people will say that 10 degrees is fine. They'll say 10 degrees is fine. So we're gonna talk about assuming that you're not over 15 pounds here. 10 degrees is fine. It is safe for most people. I typically like to opt for 12 degrees split. So split works the opposite of a basic ignition timing table. Split is how far away you're firing these 2 ignition away. So the bigger the split is, the more retarded your ignition timing is in those sense. So 12 degrees split is a pretty safe split in boost for almost any situation. So if you want to be safe, 12. If you want to be fine, 10 is also fine. But 12 is where I like to be, because when it comes to these engines, in my opinion, they are so expensive. They're super annoying to deal with. I err on the side of being conservative with all these engines, because to be frank, you guys generally aren't racing. You're not drag racing. You guys are mostly street cars. There is no reason. There is no logical reason to push these engines to the edge, because the returns aren't there. Making another 20, 30, 40 horsepower with ignition timing is not worth risking $3,000, $4,000, $5,000 in another engine. So I opt for being safe. Always. Just because it's a good idea. 6 degree split at 0 is fine. But once you get to 8 degrees, you want to be at least 10 degrees on the split. You need to be there. When you get over 20, 12 is fine at 20. Like, you're in 12 basically up to 30 or so. I like to be around 15 when I get past 30. And then beyond that, even farther back. Just for safety reasons. This is safe. I'm talking conservative stuff right now. This is safe. You're not going to blow up an engine with 12 degree split, 10 degrees of timing at 15 pounds. If you do that, you have something else wrong 100%. That's that. So I'm going to talk about something else here now, because this is a controversial subject. I don't want to go too far in the weeds and tell you what the exact answer is. I'm just showing you kind of what I do and like to do as a general example. And then furthermore, since it's retard, these numbers down here being too low, probably not your best bet, because cylinder pressures or combustion pressures are higher. So you want to have it basically scale up. And then by the time you get to the tire end, the pressure is a little bit lower. You can actually have the timing a little more advanced. So I'm just roughing this in. I'm not even putting in finalized table. Don't judge this. But yeah. So when you talk about over here now, though, in our idle and vacuum area, this is where things get kind of interesting, because there are actually really cool things you can do with this. At idle, they have a 15 degree split in the default table. My opinion, too retarded. 5 degrees, 0 degrees at idle is going to work fine. You're not going to have an issue with that. 5 degrees is going to be cool. In vacuum, however, there is a really cool idea that you can run actually negative ignition splits. This is based on the RX7 being able to do that. Negative ignition splits really, really stabilize the burnout when the car is in low load. Even in cruise, I'll run negative splits, to be honest with you. So what you can do with the negative split is you can actually run the car significantly leaner than you would with a normal split. So I can run shit like this, basically. I run like this. So I'm able then to cruise. If you're having problems cruising your car, 14.7 to 1, 14.0 to 1, your split probably or ignition timing is too low. And you need to start raising it up to get it to start burning accurately. The split, if you have them backwards, basically, will burn way more consistent, way cleaner, way more stable at leaner AFR than it will at a higher split. So 5, 0, pretty safely 0, 5 to 8 in that range is going to be cool. The default map is fine, honestly. It's pretty safe. Just I would drop the timing, the split down here. So this is just a general idea. I would not, this is not a final thing. Do not screenshot this and say this is what he says is correct. This is just a rough general idea, the general concept in play. But basically, it's like once you get in the boost, If you are 10 to 12, you're going to be fine for most situations. 10 to 15 pounds, 10 to 12 split, you'll be fine. That's enough harping on that. Let's go now to zero demand. Zero demand is a very important table. And I'm not going to say it's the single most important table, but it is an important table. Zero demand is whenever the car is at 0% throttle. My camera just turned off. I think it overheated, actually. Or maybe it didn't. Oh, no, it didn't. Okay, we're good. So basically, zero demand is whenever the car... Jesus. There we go. Zero demand is whenever the car is at idle, or it's at it's an idle condition. So when the car is 0% throttle, it defaults to this table when it's zero load. So this is our idle ignition. So a good idea for idle ignition, 10 to 12 degrees ignition timing. And then beyond that, I would say decel 25. And then you should interpolate that over to there. You see this is AC over as well. So if you have no idle air control valve as well, what you want to do is create what I call a cup. You want to have the ignition timing basically come back up, because ignition timing basically demands a change to the torque demand of the engine. So basically what happens is when the engine comes down from idle, it's going to come down like this. And you're gonna, if you ever hear your car come like kind of like do this when it comes back down the idle, the reason is because there's not enough torque to keep the engine alive. So what we do is we add ignition timing when the engine comes down, so it keeps torque alive. So it's like as like it's working against the engine basically. And when it comes down, if you have the timing set up correctly, when it hits your ignition here, it'll bring torque up enough so it'll actually basically stop it in its tracks and hold it there. This is a general idea how to get a car to idle correctly at first. Yeah, I am sorry, my brain is shutting. I'd rather start answering questions here in a minute, but yeah. So that's the general idea there. Let's go over here. We'll talk about these last bits here that are pretty important. Throttle. Let's make sure to get this right. So user demand minimum, I usually set this to 1% from the get-go. The reason I'll set this to 1% is because this is basically the TPS percentage value that when the TPS is under this, the throttle is considered closed, and that's when it activates the zero demand table. Furthermore, this is the opposite. This is wide open throttle. This is when it determines it for the user demand maximum, but the minimum is the most important one. So if you look at your TPS when the car is running and the TPS is over user demand minimum, you need to recalibrate the TPS. Sometimes TPS that are wired will flicker, or TPS that are old will flicker around. This is where we're going to kind of dole down the TPS signal. If you set this too high and you hit the throttle, you're going to notice it's going to delay. It's going to cut out. That's because the car thinks the throttle literally is still closed. So you need to make sure this is relatively close, but not too close. Because like 1%, within a couple percent, it's not going to be a big deal because you're not going to see anything. But when you get past basically 2-3%, that's when it's going to turn a little bit odd. So make sure this is set up correctly here. This can be relevant, very specifically relevant to the throttle calibration setting. So you need to make sure your throttle TPS is calibrated. If you're having issues with transient situations, it does start here. So make sure this is correct. So you're going to do your calibration 0%, 100%, etc. If you find your TPS is noisy, derivative filter is going to be the way you're going to dumb that down. You have 0 to 6 settings. If you see it's doing this a little bit, this can affect your transient situation. Make sure you're not activating transients when you're not actually hitting the throttle. Transients are the fueling that changes whenever you have a fast change of throttle, because your map sensor is not as fast as TPS. Basically what happens is these two defaults TPS for fueling for a split second to make sure the fueling is correct. Yeah, I am sweating. Let's talk about auto control. This is a very important one, and actually I've seen some questions about this one already. So BAC 2-wire, this is the default setting for the factory ISC for an FD. If you have the ISC, first off, don't fucking remove it. Stop removing those. I don't know why people do. Stop. You're making your life way harder. If it works, use it. So the way idle control works in the car is we have a target RPM, a base closed loop, start, target, offset, base, offset. So our base closed loop basically is the same way we talk about target VE versus base VE table, is the same way this works here. We'll hit our target RPM. If I want my car out at 1,000 RPM, I will start the car, run the car, and I will change this table to the car idles at 1,000 RPM. You can see this is scaled by coolant temperature. As coolant temperature drops, you need less and less idle duty, just by default, the way the engine works, how air works. So you're going to see this kind of going a downward slope. That's what you're going to do. So when the car is cold, you're going to raise it. When the car is hot, you're going to do whatever. So this is why you're also going to usually want to run a higher RPM when it's cold and then bring it down when it gets hot. So, fuck, I just hit the wrong button. 1,300. Oh, God. There we go. 1,300 there, typically, and then scaling this down to here. Yep. And then, yeah, Dwight added that, yeah, noise TPS, not filter, will make the car annoying. Yep, that's exactly why you should do that. So we have that. Base closed loop is going to tune the same way. Honestly, just start with the default settings. You have the idle control valve. If you have ignition only, that is to say you don't have an idle air control valve in the car, and you need the idle car via ignition. For one, that zero demand table is going to be important. You're going to raise the ignition through there. Furthermore, you have this ignition correction table. I would put this around -15, interpolate this over, leave this up here. So what this is basically doing is, however far away your RPM is from your target, against how fast the RPM is moving, will change the ignition tip. So your ignition is going to be doing this the entire ignition tip. You want to be really fast, and it's basically keep it in check. You're going to find issues with trying to keep the car idle when it's cold. This is where the physical part of the throttle body comes in play. It's beyond the scope of this. But yeah, this target RPM, these two tables work in coordination with each other. More ignition will cause the car to speed up, less will pull down. And this table is going to be relevant to your zero demand table. So if I have 10 degrees in my zero demand table and I'm 200 RPM over, it'll be 0 degrees of ignition timing to try to pull it down. So this table is dynamic. It's working in the way against your RPM and your against the target and everything. Boost control is beyond the scope. We're not going to talk about that right now. Air pump, disable that shit. You don't need it. Thermofan, this is going to be your fan controller. The FD has a weird fan control setup where it has 2 speeds. You need to set it to a single speed setup, honestly, and run it that way. I like turning my fans on at 180 and turning them off at 175. That's my recommendation. You can run at 199, 196 if you want to. It's up to you. I do 180, 175. Main limiter. This is your RPM limiter. 8,000 RPM. I will add this as well for the FDs. Very important. If you have your ignition set the soft cut, if you have to set the soft cut, what happens is the way this is calculating the limiter, and people get this one confused a lot too, the FD triggers are noisy. And that's why it's important to dial in the trigger noise. If you don't dial in trigger noise and your RPM derivative is being weird, ignition cut basically says RPM plus RPMD, or RPM derivative, is how it knows when to start cutting the ignition. So if you have a noisy RPM signal and your RPMD is noisy, you're going to start cutting early. This is why cars will start cutting 6,500, 7,000 RPM. There's 2 ways to fix this. One, you do your RPM derivative, which is under your trigger settings up here. Trigger settings there, derivative filter. You can set this filter up and filter the RPM as a whole. If you do that correctly and set it up, you will then have your limiter go correctly. It'll cut the right time. If this is too noisy, it'll cut too early. If you have this filter maxed out and it's still cutting, change your main limiter cut type to hard cut. Hard cut means it ignores RPMD and only cuts when the RPM literally goes over the RPM. So the other one is basically stopping it within, it's basically going, okay, I know what speed the engine's approaching the RPM limiter. I'm going to start cutting the engine out so it hits the limiter. The other one goes, I'm not going to cut till we hit that. So the difference with hard cut, though, is if your RPM rises too fast, you have a big situation, it might overshoot your limiter. So make sure you're setting it safe relative to that. Overboost cut, that's your boost cut pressure. The same way I was talking about doing the target, the lean protection, you can set your boost control the same way with table axis. Set this up across boost target. Oh, whatever. Fuck it. Target boost. Oh my gosh. Whatever. You can set up across target boost and then set your overboost against your target and then tune the car. And if it hits that against target, you're set up. I saw someone mention this as well. We're getting to the last bit because, yeah, I need to start answering questions. We have decel. If you have an oil metering pump, disable this. Disable decel cut. You need to keep it going because you're running 2-stroke oil. It's going to keep your engine lubricated. If you have an oil metering pump, you can leave decel cut on. It's good for economy situation. But typically, this is going to be off for most of you guys once you guys have deleted your oil metering pump. If your oil metering pump's deleted, delete decel cut. And then you can disable your oil metering pump. The oil metering pump does need some calibration. The default settings from the Haltech are not correct. That's beyond the scope of right now as well. So with all of that said and done, your first steps after you have all this stuff set up, there's a lot of stuff to go on. I just realized how much it was. I'm literally an hour over time now. Once you have all this stuff set up, you can then basically start the car up. You need to basically lock the timing, which is under the ignition timing setting right here. You hit always on. It'll set there. Be -5 to 15. That's going to be your default markings on the front cover for the engine. Put the timing light on, make sure it's lined up, and then you use your trigger setting, your TDC offset, and line it up. Usually for the FDs, it'll be pretty close to spot on, but if you need to adjust it, it'll be here. And then from there, the car should run from the get-go. So that's a ton of information, and I really kind of sped through at the end. I do want to make an actual standalone video for that stuff alone. I'm just kind of doing live stuff. The real point of this really was you question and answer. The seminar part of this was just to be, official. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to answer the questions. And we're going to go through this. Let me see what we've got here on our question side here. Okay, I don't know how to look at the questions actually here. If you haven't submitted questions yet, we'll have them here in a second here. I'm going to go through our questions we have through Google here. So, spoke out to my face. Jesus, I am all over the place at the moment. Okay, ADHD is taking over now. So I got a question here. It is from G. Gervasi. His name is Ida Dorito. I don't know why he put that there. How is timing set on a rotary? With newer ECUs, I believe timing can be locked then set. Without a modern ECU Power FC, how is timing set? Is regular piston timing light sufficient for a rotary? Yes, the timing light for a piston engine is sufficient. How you set timing on a Power FC, I don't know. My answer, and I'm going to be crude here, is to throw that shit away. It is 2025. Use a modern computer. Don't use old shit. You're just asking for trouble, especially with how fragile these engines are. Don't waste your time with Power FC. I'm tired of seeing people talk about them. To be honest, I don't mean to be mean. I'm just being honest. Setting I just showed lock the engine timing on the thing. Sorry. Hope to see info on drive-by-wire idle control setups. Let's talk about that, Jesse. Actually, the RX8 guy. So really cool setup here. Under our, let me switch over to the camera real quick here. So setting up drive-by-wire idle ignition, idle stuff. On idle control here, where it says this, first we need to have the drive-by-wire setup. So let me turn that on real quick here. So drive-by-wire is on. Okay, so under idle control here, we could set our method to drive-by-wire. So the way drive-by-wire works is pretty straightforward. We have our output max, our drive-by-wire output max position. So output max is going to be the amount of base duty that we can apply. This duty is relevant relative to our max position. Max position is how far open we're going to allow our throttle body to be open. That being said, our base closed loop is also relative to that. So if I have this at 50% on my base closed loop and my max percent is 10%, that means my TPS is in at 5%. So what I am doing with this, the same way you tune the idle air control valve is the same way I'm going to tune drive-by-wire here. So if I find that it is being too sensitive, I'm going to take this down farther. So if I have 10% and the thing is going crazy, I can down to 8% because it's all these numbers will be relative to this number. So if it's wanting to do 55% and the PIDs are set up and they're too sensitive, it's going to do some crazy shit. So all that's there. And how I talked about the throttle stuff earlier with this user demand stuff, this user demand stuff is then now relative to APP, your accelerator pedal position. So in some situations when you calibrate your APP, it might not be completely zero. So set your user demand minimum to above where your APP rests at. Because in some situations, APP will sit like 0.9%. And then it'll like flicker to 1%. It'll turn the auto control on and off. It's super fucking annoying. Set this number over where your APP percentage is. From there, honestly, it tunes exactly like a whatever. Another trick that you should know that I already know ahead of time, a lot of people don't know, and I don't know where my chat went. But I know a lot of people already don't know. Where the fuck did I put the chat? There we go. That I know a lot of people already don't know is this function, the throttle follower dash pot. On a drive-by-wire, this is a godsend of a setting. What this does is actually delays the speed the throttle closes. So if you're finding that your car, especially big throttle bodies, when it shuts throttle body real quick, that the car dies, you can use this and basically turn base duty on. So this is a decaying base duty. So I like to put these around 5 or 6% or so. So basically it's around 2,000 RPM, it's going to add 5% duty, and it's going to add it for this amount of time. So for 0.4 of a second. And if you dial this in correctly, you can have the throttle basically come down and then level out like that. So instead of the throttle, the trace being like this, you can have the throttle trace be like this, and it'll be smooth when it comes down and level out. It really helps control the air, especially when you have big ports, low displacement engines, big injectors. It smooths out the reduction in the throttle a ton. It'll save your life a lot. Believe me, this is setting that took me a while to figure out. Saved my life, especially with big throttle bodies, and it's huge. Okay. What's your take on fuel decel cut? How to get smooth decel and back on idle fueling? So decel cut I talked about before. I would recommend turning it off if you have an metering pump. A big part of that is if you over enrich coming down and you try to get on throttle, you get a lot of weird transient situations. So a big part of the back on idle fueling, etc., that throttle follower situation I just talked about will help you a lot. The other thing is your closed loop activation offset, which used to be called decel cut offset, is going to be when it basically starts turning on your idle control stuff. So you can basically have it switch back over. Fuck, my camera's overheating, so I'm not gonna have the camera on. You can have it switch back over to the fueling to your default map instead of the decel cut stuff, etc. Have it that way. That being said, you can build a table out across decel cut and have the fuel set up that way and add or move fuel the way you want to. Yeah, there's that. It's kind of a complicated subject to get into, but as far as decel cut with an oil metering pump off the car, I would leave it off, and then I would have everything set up. But as far as coming back on the idle fueling, or while it's up, like transients are on play there. as well as that. Just having your actual fuel map tuned correctly will fix a lot of that. As long as your VE is correct, you're not going to have issues with the car coming back down the idle, typically. Ian Trumbor in the house says, should any caution be taken applying long-term trims with pump gas and ethanol blends that use a flex fuel sensor, i.e. 2 tanks of blend and 3 tanks of pump in between applying adjustments? That's a really good question, actually. So the answer to this is there's a hack for what you're asking in particular. If you scale your fuel table, which I don't typically like to do, but if you scale your fuel table by ethanol percentage, which I know a lot of people in this community do, honestly kind of drives me insane. But let's say I have this and I do 50, oh, fuck, come on now. Do I have my number lock turned off? Yeah, 15, 20, 50, 60, 80, 100. So if I have my fuel table and I have a 4D fuel map, right, set up that has all these fuel situations. So I'm just going to do like this. Make this table huge, for example. So if I have this all set up and I have long-term trims turned on, if I have long-term trims turned on, the long-term trims table, I don't know if you know this, is also adjustable. So if I have this table here, right now it's 3-dimension. It is my load versus my RPM. I can right-click on this table axis. I can enable that fuel. If I hit enable, it won't show up, but it'll be fuel composition. I can then put the fuel composition numbers in there as well. So what this does is if you include fuel composition on your long-term trim table, it's applying long-term trims across the composition separately. So it's applying trims to each individual table at the same time too. So when you're talking about applying the trims, if you want to be careful in that regard, what you can do is make a 40 table out of your long-term fuel trim table with composition on top. And then it'll apply the composition equally across the table to the tables individually rather than a wholesale correction across the entire table. That's how you can do what you're talking about, and that's how you can do it the most cautious way possible. That being said, in general, talking about what you're talking about, like if you just had a wholesale change, I wouldn't be concerned about it. It's usually not that big of a deal. The real thing you're going to be changing then at that point is going to be your fuel composition scalar table over here under corrections. If you have your fuel comp on, you're really going to make those corrections here under your fuel composition correction table here, or fuel composition scalar table here. Those are going to be there as well. So if you have those all dialed in, you have those all set correctly. The same way we're talking about target lambda versus base fuel. If these are all modeled correctly, ideally your one VE table will apply for all fuels because fuel doesn't affect VE until you get to really extensive exotic stuff. It doesn't affect VE. So in theory, your VE should be the same across all things, and your composition, scalar, and corrections should be handling the brunt of everything else. Cool. I think that handles that. Can you do an overview of setting up launch control and touch on potential pitfalls? Another great question. Let's talk about launch control. Because I've seen people just throw the default settings in these things and then not actually look at them. So if we turn on launch control here. So we have ignition advance, fuel correction, and then RPM. So setting this up, let's say I want to use 6,000 RPM launch control. Fuck, my thing just turned off. We have ignition advance here. So ignition advance here is going to be very important. So ignition advance can be when we start retarding timing and having fuel ignite in the turbo manifold, we want to have, to be frank, the minimum amount of ignition pool possible to bring the boost up. The default negative 25, in my opinion, is way too aggressive. EGTs will shoot up through the fucking roof. It won't come on smooth. It'll be super inconsistent. On top of that, too, is that if the ignition timing is pulled too far back, you get inconsistent RPM hold. And the real thing with launch control is to have really consistent launches is having a very consistent RPM. It's a big part of drag race to make it work correctly. So our goal here with our launch control ignition is to pull the ignition back far enough where it hits the boost, but not so far enough back that it makes the RPM inconsistent when it hits the boost that we're wanting. So if I wanted to make 14 pounds of boost in this situation, the way that I'm going to do that is I'm going to make 14 pounds there, and I'm going to make a number right over 14. And what happens is that when the car crosses over here, I would have this be like negative 10. When the car is atmospheric, it's going to start pulling ignition timing. And as it comes up in boost, it's going to come up more. If I'm trying to make 14 pounds of boost, once I go past 14 pounds, I don't need to keep pulling timing. So I'm going to go back on the positive past 14 pounds. So once I get past that, it's good, right? So what I have then is I have negative 10 is usually my good starting point. If I find the car's not making a boost, I start going down. But usually negative 5, negative 10 on a Rotary engine is going to be enough to make enough boost. So what will happen then is the car will come up. You want to have, don't make the mistake as well, you want to have positive ignition timing as the car is in vacuum and as it's coming up. As long as you're away, so if you're trying to make, for example, in this example, 6,000 RPM, 25 degrees, 20 degrees timing. You want to have enough ignition RPM to give enough torque to be able to bring it up. Because basically what you're going to do is you're going to try to basically throw the engine through the ignition timing. And once it gets through the ignition timing, you get enough momentum in the engine. The engine's then going to pull the timing, make the power, etc. So we're going to have it come up here, 25. It's going to go over here. And once it gets in the 6,000 range, we're going to be able to pull timing. And it's going to keep pulling timing, and it's going to sit that negative 10 range until it's 14 pounds. And when it's 14 pounds, if it goes over 14 pounds, it's then going to start going to positive timing. As it goes into positive timing, it's going to stop making boosts and it's coming back down. This is how you self-regulate the boost where you want it to be target for launch. On top of that, you have your fuel correction. You're going to have your fuel correction be 10, 20, 30%. If you do too much, it's going to bog out. If you do too little, you just want to have enough fuel correction the car will hold there. Because truthfully, O2 control at that point is not accurate, so you really can ignore it. But you want to be on the rich side, but not the too rich side. If you have it too rich, it'll bog. So that's a general idea. There's more advanced ways to dive into that. I usually will do mine across a launch end RPM error, across a manifold boost control error, and then I'll set my boost control to where I want my control to be, and I'll have this entire table scaled that way rather than having just a wholesale RPM versus map. So hopefully that answers your question. But that's your idea. As far as pitfalls, if you have too much ignition retard, you're going to end up having an issue with EGTs. You're going to melt shit. And then if you don't have enough fuel correction, you run it lean, you're going to have issues as well. But frankly, it's not super dangerous to do. As long as you run your timing, negative 10 is a good place to start. Even negative 5, negative 7, honestly, is enough for a lot of cars. Really, the turbo size is what's going to determine how much ignition time you're going to be pulling. Like, for example, my race car, I have a 7685, so a 76 millimeter turbo on my Honda Civic. I cannot make boost in that car unless I'm pulling at 15, 20 degrees of timing. But then when I get up near my timing, I have around negative 5. So really a lot of the brunt is the negative time is going to be at the beginning, and then you can start bleeding timing. You can start putting timing back in as it approaches your target because you can keep the speed up without killing EGTs. So it's like a balancing act between everything there that you have to take into consideration with launch control stuff. Hopefully that answers your question. Let's go to the next one here. Another one from Ian. Are there types of brands of sensors that you've witnessed fail at a higher rate? Do you have preferred sensor manufacturer and preferred sensor housing type? Basically, any of the Honeywell stainless steel sensors are going to do everything you want to do. The Bosch combined sensors, the fuel temperature, fuel pressure sensor, whatever those temperature sensors, I would avoid the combination sensors. And the reason is because the Bosch style ones, when they fail, just shoot fluid out the fucking top. So if you're using that for fuel pressure and temperature using the combination sensor, and the fuel sensor fails, it will shoot fuel out of the sensor, and that is obviously a major problem. But any of the Honeywell sensors, can be your Haltech, your AEM, etc. I use low dollar sensors for Chinese sensors, but those work fine on my car. The real issue isn't necessarily the sensors failing. As far as brands go, the issue is the mounting problems with sensors. So a lot of pressure sensor failures begin at vibration. So what you're going to want to do is mount your sensors off of the engine for one. People that are mounting them directly on fuel rails, directly on the oil filter pedestal, etc. You're setting yourself up for failure because vibration is typically what actually kills the sensors. Sensors normally don't go off. So what you can do that is get like a P-clamp to the firewall, do something along those lines. Isolate it away from the vibrations of the car. Vibrations are really what kills sensors. Even a cheap sensor can survive if it's isolated off. As far as O2 sensors, which I'm not sure if that's what you're alluding at as well, as long as the O2 sensor is mounted in the correct location, you can usually be fine. A lot of O2 sensor failures come from incorrect mounting of said sensor, not being 15 degrees over horizontal in the actual pipe itself, or being in the path of condensation is what nukes Bosch 4.9 sensors, where people contribute that to like the innovative sensors, etc. No, it's the Bosch 4.9. Condensation nukes those sensors. The NTKs are a little bit less sensitive, but in my experience on the Haltech side, I would not run an NTK for most people's situations because they're really finicky. The firmware is kind of wishy-washy from Haltech specifically. They're not particularly accurate, and they can be off by a lot. So stick to the Bosch 4.9s if you can. That's my recommendation for that. Once again, hopefully that one answers your question. Let's hear. What would be the best way to wire and sensor my 13BT and a Haltech Elite 2000? So, loaded question. That's from Al Garcia Tirado. Loaded question to say. It depends on how far down the rabbit hole you're going to want to do. If I was my car, I would either buy the connectors from like ProWire USA. I would buy all the TE connectivity sensors, the connectors and Super Seal connectors, the pins. I'll buy everything individually and do it myself using TEFSA wire or TXL wire. If you want the easy way to do it, buy the Haltech flying lead harness, follow their color diagram, do it that way. If you have wiring experience, build it all yourself. I buy everything from scratch. I build all my harnesses from scratch. But if you're getting started, start with the flying lead harness, because honestly, it's a nice guide to walk you through. It's all color coded. Makes your life way easier to figure it out. But if you have experience, build it from scratch. Okay, next question from Johnson says, I have an FD street car with AC power steering using a Power FC. I'm not going to answer that. I don't know anything about Power FC. I'm sorry. I guess not. You're asking a question about IGN-1As. It's not relevant to the thingies. Make 300 horsepower. IGN-1A coils overkill. What kind of Haltech do you recommend? What sensors? Sorry, I'm going to read this all so you understand. I'm just talking to myself. I have an FD street car with AC and power steering using a Power FC. It has an EFR 7670, stock engine, stock primary injectors, ID 2000 secondary injectors, tuned at 300 horsepower. Our IGN-1A is overkill. What kind of Haltech do you recommend? What sensors do you recommend to run? Do I need a better crank sensor, or is it overkill for my application? I'm also interested in adding driver wire. Is there a specific one you recommend? Have you played with enabling cruise control? Thanks for your time and knowledge. So first off, I don't think that IGN-1As are overkill in your situation. I think that the injectors are overkill in your situation. ID 2000s for 300 horsepower is insane. But IGN-1As, to be honest, dealing with, OEM coils and their pitfalls and, the failure rates, etc., IGN-1As are not a bad idea as far as reliability goes. They're not overkill. They give you overhead. I wouldn't be concerned about IGN-1As being overkill. As far as a Haltech I'd recommend for that car, the Nexus S2 is going to be your best bet, 100%. If you want to run more injectors, more power long-term, but a bigger turbo, the S3 is a better option, but an S2 is going to get you everything you need. What sensors I recommend to run for that situation? Wideband, obviously, W1 from Haltech, fuel pressure sensor, oil pressure sensor. If you can, not necessarily necessary, but thermocouplers and EGT sensors, so the TCA8. Those are my main recommended sensors for a rotary situation. The good things to have as well. Haltech crank trigger sensor is a good idea, just because it's more modern, a little more reliable. But really, honestly, fuel pressure, wideband are the two sensors I'll say everyone needs. EGTs are nice to have. Can you quickly go over limp mode and engine protections from Ian? I did from Ian. I don't know. That's not Ian Trumbor. It's another Ian. If I didn't do that adequately, you can ask again. But I did do that inherently by default by going over the base map stuff. So now we're going to go over the YouTube questions because I'm now getting off the Google ones. And there's some reason not scaling up. So let's see here. Let's look at this question here. How do I... Okay. My tuner has stopped responding to me. When I'm high RPM and let off the throttle to 0 TPS, I get AFR levels as rich as 4 to 6 to 1. Hold on, it shut off on me. 4 to 6 to 1. What should I look at? What should I be worried? So at low vacuum on these cars, sometimes it's a little odd. So what you're going to see is that, at high vacuum. At high vacuum, these cars are going to be a little weird. Honestly, it's simple. Just remove fuel. Remove fuel while it's in cruise. Honestly, 11 to 12 to 1 in decel is more than adequate. 4 to 6 is egregious. That is way too much. You're going to keep... I'm sure you're fouling plugs, like a cubic fuck ton at that point. Target 11 to 12. Just start pulling fuel out of the base fuel table and make sure that your target lambda is also at 11, 12, give or take. And then you should be able to get it there. But also, being that rich, I'd be a little concerned about compression because getting down the 4 to 6... Even reading that on a wideband is difficult. I'm not entirely sure how you have a wideband reading that low, if it's an NTK maybe. But 4 to 6 is egregiously rich. I'd be looking at 11 to 12. Let's see. Get Kyle says, can you go over ignition IGN-1A settings for setup? You covered the well. What was the proper trigger settings and setup? So the IGN-1A settings, the only setting you're changing on the IGN-1A setting literally is the dwell. Engine functions, engine calibrations, engine settings. So dwell time there. So you're going to do the dwell. Like I said, 4.5 is going to be usually pretty good for most rotary cars in general. But as far as engine setting systems here, change ways to spark the direct fire. That's it. As long as you have direct fire set. That's all you're doing. That's literally the only change for IGN-1As. Nothing else. So the dwell time in that, then you're set. That's it. So there's not much more to it. What AFRs would you target for target on street port? So I kind of went over that, but I'll go back over it. Idle 13.5, 14 to 1. At cruise 14.0, 14.7. Wide open throttle. In boost, anywhere between 11.5 to 10.8, depending on how much boost. I do 11.2, 11.5 up to probably 8 to 10, and then drop down to 10.8 past 10 if you're on pump gas. If you're on ethanol, you can run 11.1, 11.5, pretty high boost levels. Pump gas, I'll go under 10.8, basically past 15. It's just a good, safe number to be at. Should map prediction be enabled after tuning, or can be enabled right away? Right away. Start from the get-go. I do it from the beginning. If you see like you hit the throttle and the car kind of does weird hesitations, turn on transit. You can make yourself way easier. But like if you sit there and hit the throttle a couple times over and over again, eventually it'll figure itself out. And if it doesn't, you can start actually manipulating the table itself. But usually map prediction will figure itself out relatively quickly. Definitely interested in flex fuel settings. I'm not sure what you mean by that. If you want to resubmit that question, the heck 123, I can definitely go through that. If you want to give me in particular, I will help you through that. Gavin Hogberg says, for the Haltech base maps, it looks like the Series 6 FD is the oldest one available. I'm fairly new to the tuning, so sorry if this is a dumb question. What can we run S4, S5, NA, FCs? So I would start with the FC map. So under file open, base maps. So I know where your problem is. Sorry. Under Mazda here, you hit RX7, right? And you're here. Ignore that. Go to 13B terminated harness, and you have S4, S5 in there as well. That being said, these are all turbo-based maps, not NA, but they'll be a good starting point to get you moving. You can start with that. And there's also NA peripheral port, bridge port maps in here as well. It looks like I actually did not know that until just now. But these are all here. So under NA, so for the S4, S5 stuff, for all the default stuff, for the base map stuff, look under the terminated harness. The reason it's terminated harness and not RX7 is because there is no plug-and-play option for the FC. So they're assuming if you're doing an FC using the terminated harness. So you use the terminated harness map instead of the RX7 maps. So your oldest one you're going to find will be the terminated harness, not there. So that's probably where your confusion is. What would be the main causes for stutters during idle or free rev? It depends. So ignition timing would be a big one. So if your ignition timing is too retarded or it's constantly cutting timing, it's gonna stumble. The other thing is injector settings. If your injector settings and dead times are wrong and the fuel map is wrong, it's gonna be fuel ignition. One of the two, typically is gonna be the cause. So those are gonna be the two main ones. So that's gonna hopefully answer that. Literally, it's just like if it's stuttering really bad, and the air fuel is where it's supposed to be, it's going to be ignition timing, 100%. Like, it's too retarded. You just want to add more timing on the rev up. It's just not building enough torque to be able to basically rev up. Do you have any tuning from Ron Dodds? Do you have any tuning considerations or experience running a catalytic converter on a single turbo versus catless? To be honest, no, I don't. I actually don't tune very many catted cars. That might be a better question. I don't know if we have tuners in here at this point. That might be a better question for them. I don't tune catted cars very often, so I don't know that information. I would imagine it's the exact same, but I know that catalytic converters also don't like heat as much, so there is consideration taken to that. Like, I don't think you can run them quite as rich or quite as lean as you can. I don't know what direction it is. Sorry, I don't know the actual answer to that question. But yeah, let's see here. I'm just gonna read back the chat now. If you guys have questions, go ahead and ask them. It is now 10. We've been here for over 2 hours, 2.5 hours now. I'll answer any question we have. I'll basically give like a 3-minute timeout because it's late and I need to eat. I literally have not eaten food today. But yeah, let's see here. I said, Wade says, had this stop for a second, so I'm catching up. Oh yeah, no problem, man. Thanks, man. Do you talk on the Facebook group drama? I mean, there's no point. I've already fucking murdered the guy that was the whole thing, to be frank. Yeah, I'm that guy. He's delusional. Like, that's what it comes down to. My only goal with that whole thing in general is that I hope that he realizes generally in terms of a person, how he is, how he approaches people, how he talks to people. The reason I went so hard on him for so long too is because, like, when I initially started jumping back in the rotary cars, I asked him for help and he was a fucking dickhead to me from the get-go. And I just was like, this guy is not, I've known him since 2014, 13 range. Has not changed a bit. And then, yeah, you'll notice it's only one person. I don't talk shit about anybody else. It's only him. And it's just because he is beyond saving. So I'm just hoping that whole situation humbled him a bit more, that he understands that how people actually see him, because there's a lot of people that see him a very particular way. And then hopefully, I think on the other hand, I think that people now see that very two-faced. He very much talks and will hype you up and talk to you very much one way. But the second you do anything he thinks is wrong to him, which is a classic narcissistic trait, he will try to destroy you. So, yeah, that's kind of where I have to say about that general thing. I'm just hoping that he humbles himself typically, and that's really about it. I mean, literally making someone call their own thing trash should be enough of a wake-up call to realize you're fucking stupid. But that's all I have to say about that, typically. Let's see. When the increased ignition timing cause it to knock. Talking about the low load. So to kind of go back, so low load situations, it's kind of hard to knock with ignition timing. If you add enough ignition time that cause it to knock in that situation, that's way too much timing. But you're going to know well beforehand. So if the car's not revving up, like, honestly, I'm just going to say this. Don't go over 30 degrees. If you don't go over 30 degrees and the car is still doing it, if you go over 30 degrees and the car is still doing it, you have an actual issue probably with fueling. But if you stand at 30 degrees and it cleans up, leave it there. You'll be fine. You're not going to knock at low, like, revving and idle. It's not going to happen. Idle, don't go over basically 15. You'll be fine after that. That's really about it. Can confirm wasted a bunch of money on Haltech and DK, which ended up not working. Yeah, it's they're still working on it. They've gone through tons of firmware, and then there's like multiple sensors with different resistors. It's a whole thing. See, I tell everyone to get the LSU 4.9. The only time the NTK is relevant is if you are running like methanol, which nobody here is. So yeah, that's a highly advanced situation. And I'm going to say that if you're in here asking, you're not at that level, and you shouldn't be worrying about it. Just get an LSU 4.9. Call it a day. Aiden says, is there any benefit to changing secondary stage and duty cycle depending on porting, such as bridge port, semi-peripheral port? So your only concern with the secondary staging is making sure that the secondary ports are open. Now, I don't know if you're confusing that in particular with injector angle, which is extremely important with these cars. You want to make sure injector angle is being injected at the correct time. There's a lot of power to be had in injection angle and make sure the car doesn't tip over. And that's actually the thing I should make a whole video on in its own right. But yeah, injection angle is more important than duty cycle in that rate. But also you got to understand as well, and this is, I'm going to go down the weeds for a second, is that injector and I find that a lot of people don't know what injector duty cycle actually is. Injector duty cycle is the measure of injector open time against the engine cycle time. So an engine cycles, and the rotary engine cycles in 360 degrees. So because it cycles in 360 degrees, we have injector angle. Injector angle is, and normal situations, if you're not fucking retarded, is based on the end of injection timing. So basically, end of injection timing is a backwards calculation of when the injector is going to inject fuel, and then basically when the injector will always end at the same spot. So when you're targeting your injection angle, your injector duty cycle angle, you want the timing to be at the point right when it's making the optimal power. And then everything else behind that is whatever. So the longer injector duty cycle is, the bigger it is, the longer the injector is injecting, right? So if you have 360 degrees and you have we'll say 60 degree injector angle, you then have 300 degrees of angle to inject inject fuel into the engine. You have 300 degrees. So if you have a 100% duty cycle, you are then injecting the cycle fuel relative to the cycle for 360 degrees after that 60 degrees. So for 420 degrees, you're then getting injection. This is why when you have injection and if you start tuning rotaries more, you'll find that they start fucking up past like 80%. You can only go about 80% duty cycle. That's because it's injecting for 80% of that 360 degrees. And it turns the whole mess basically beyond that. So the two things you're saying are related, but the real main thing you're looking at is injector angle more than it is duty cycle. And this is where stuff gets really in the weeds. And this is my naturally aspirated Honda tuning racing experience. Is there are benefits for sizing injectors against the runner, and targeting specific injector duty cycles. So, for instance, I'm talking about 80%. You should be targeting 80% of rotary engine. Max duty cycle if you want to have efficient fueling. So if you have like 1,000 cc injector and you see it's going over 80%, you should put a bigger injector in the car so you can make sure all the fuel is getting in there, and you can use less duty cycle to make sure it's in that injection window. You're trying to have fuel go inside that injection window, like I said, based on 360 degrees against your end of injection against duty cycle. So you need to be calculating your duty cycle against that with the percentages. It's a whole fucking math equation that fucking fries your brain. But the reason why I have to worry about that so much for piston engines is we use what's called closed valve injection. So we're injecting fuel against the closed valve, and we're using huge overlap cams, huge duration cams, And because we're doing that, we have to time the injectors correctly to hit the valve correctly so we can make the most power naturally aspirated. Because in our class, 5 horsepower is an enormous difference. So injection angle in a 2.7 liter, 16.5 to 1 methanol fed ITB car, you're talking about 15, 20 horsepower injector duty cycle angle just from the fueling angle alone. In a naturally aspirated car, when a car makes like 440, 450 horsepower, it's a big deal. The same thing applies to rotaries. You're trying to get the fuel in the port because you can't inject across a valve. So, yeah, I mean, that's kind of convoluted. I don't want to go down the weeds, and it's kind of hard to explain to somebody without explaining 40 different concepts at the same time. But yeah, injector angle is what you're actually really concerned about more than duty cycle when it talks about the secondary staging in particular. Some of the primaries as well, by the way. I'm getting some kind of misfire sometimes. I just changed the plugs and they were kind of fouled and it looks better on idle now. Yeah, I mean, if your plugs are fouled, they're going to misfire, but it also probably means your car's running too rich or the ignition timing is too retarded, or your ejection angle is wrong, shit like that. Like, there's a lot of stuff that can cause that. But yeah, if your thing's running too rich, you're going to foul out plugs. And then like your plug range is wrong relative to what you're running, you're going to foul plugs easier, etc. Have less tolerance for things. Thank you, awesome Cinema man. First setup of my FD build is going to be very soon. This is huge help. Yeah, man, not a problem, Ron. Not a problem at all. Yeah, someone asked follow up valve plugs thing. Cats don't like heat next to. Yeah, okay, there you go. Yeah, Kyle knows more than I would. He does more of the fucking cat cars. I literally don't. I have never tuned a catalytic converter car in my life. That's how little I know about them. So I'm not going to try to act like I know. I see I couldn't get really idle, probably a higher AFR. Yeah, so here's a trick. If you want the car to idle at a higher AFR, a leaner AFR, start fucking with your split. Run lower split, even a negative split at idle. It'll probably clean up. It's the burn's not stable. Depending on injector sizes too, has to do with dead times. There's a lot of stuff involved with that. Dead times, injection angle, ignition timing. Those 3 things will be the biggest things that are affecting it. But if you're like huge injectors, like 2,000 cc's, getting them to idle consistently is difficult, just by default. Ignition timing not question was during launch control, if I recall. Okay, so no. The answer to that is no. And it's the same reason. It's not enough load to cause knock, by the way. So, yeah, we're going retarded time to do that stuff. When you're in boost, it's retarded timing. And basically what's happening is when you start adding ignition timing back in, when the boost is there, it's like there's not enough load even in launch control to cause issues. / it's not going to be at 20 degrees. The 20 degrees is like a wall. It's like a cushion. So it's going to kind of come up against it, but it's not actually going to advance that fast. You put it up that high so the ignition timing does this basically, and it'll sit there and your boost will sit level with your ignition time will do this, and it'll hold your boost level where it is. So the 20 is not a big deal. If you feel more comfortable, you can put it at 10. Really, it's just as long as it stops making boost. I put it at 20 because like it's going to naturally stop and it's going to pull back down and it's going to sit there and cycle in that ignition timing range and hold the boost where it wants to be. And that I should say as well, to give you an idea of how confident I am in saying that, I run 40 pounds of boost in the 2-step of my car, and I make 1,000 horsepower at 40 pounds. That's how much. That's how you can do it. It's not a big deal. You can do it. Okay. Thanks for seminar. Yeah, not a problem, guys. I like doing this. It's cool. Are CAN widebands better than analog widebands? So from Get GTI Kyle, yes, 100%. Here's the reason why. CAN widebands communicate more data than 0 to 5 volts. So an analog wideband is going to communicate 0 to 5 volts. And the problem with that in particular is that if your sensor fails or has a problem, it's going to stick one or the other. Now, there are diagnostic modes you can set up, but not every time will it stick in the middle. Sometimes it'll stick on the outside. Sometimes it'll stick in the middle. And when it sticks in the middle like that, and you have a failure mode, the car is going to add or remove fuel when it's not accurate. Whereas a CAN wideband will go, oh, the sensor shut off, and it's going to turn off O2 control completely. So CAN has the ability to communicate more data than a 0 to 5 volt will. And if it fails, the sensor doesn't, the 0 to 5 volt doesn't have a 0 to, like, doesn't always have a fail mode sending thing, if that makes sense. So that's why it is better in particular than an analog setup. And also on top of that, it's not sensitive to ground offsets. So like if your sensor has a weird ground issue, the 0 to 5 volt is going to be obviously influenced by the ground, the reference. So if the reference changes, the voltage is going to skew off. So you get more accuracy with the CAN because it's not dependent on the ground offset. Because the sensor itself is going to the box translates the signal, and then sends the ECU and communicates it via CAN. So yeah, CAN wideband is significantly better. Injection angle video, yes, that's going to be a thing by itself, by the way, Lex Freak. Yes, CAN wideband don't suffer from voltage ground offset. Yeah, I see Dwight actually answered the same question before I even read it. Yeah, 100%. He's 100% correct there. Dwight is 100% correct. He answered the question right, I see. Tips for getting drive-by-wire quicker, snappier free revs from idle. That's solely a transient throttle. That's not a drive-by-wire issue. That is a transient fueling issue. So map prediction, transient throttle needs to be dialed in. Drive-by-wire has nothing to do with that. So yeah, Mike, that's not really a direct answer, but it's transient. It's a transient fueling question. So if your car is lagging, if the way you can think about transient is if you have the throttle and it stops and hesitates and then revs, it's too lean. If you have the throttle kind of and it comes up slow, it's too rich. And you just need to adjust the fuel. And when you're adjusting fuel there, it's a by fuel thing. Do it in big increments, like 30, 40%. And then it should dial in relatively quick. You don't need to worry about 5, 10. Do like literally like 30, 40, 50% changes. Make big changes, and it's be fine. There is no such thing as correct AFR on transient stuff. It's about whether or not the car revs fast or not. Just do your transient stuff. So cool. All right. So if we have any more questions, I'll answer them right now. Otherwise, I think we're pretty close to wrapped. We've been here for 2.5 hours, 2 hours, 37 minutes, 28 seconds. I gave you a cubic fuck ton of information. There's still actually the concurrent viewers have been pretty consistent through the entire thing. So I want to say thanks to everyone that's been here and sat through here and listened to me ramble. Even though I kind of started falling off towards the end, my fucking brain is fried. I was a little more mentally intense than I thought. I was sure it's going to be 2 hours. We're now at basically pushing 2.5 hours at this point. But yeah, so what I want to add to this as well, while I'm sure there might be another question here as well. This is going to be, I want to make more of these for sure. And I'm going to be doing more and more as we go. And I think the next one's probably VE by itself alone. Just because that is a huge subject to go over. And I've tried to avoid really going down the rabbit hole of a lot of stuff. Because I can talk about each individual setting we just talked about. I could talk about probably 30 minutes to an hour a piece. So I had to really limit myself and hold back. So that's why I want to do videos that are comprehensive on every setting, because there's so much information to know, so many tricks to know about everything. And there's things you won't know until you do it. So, and I've done everything at this point, honestly. Not everything, you know what I mean? But like anything that you probably gonna run into, I've probably dealt with. And if I don't, I have no problem holding my hands up and saying I don't fucking know. But I probably have come across it. I see a question here from Son and Soft. Is there a way to set up to disregard input from a failed sensor? Fuel pressure, for instance, where the ECU assume fuel pressure. Yeah, absolutely, 100%. So to do that is under your diagnostic mode. So under fuel pressure here, click here and go to diagnostics. So you're going to see you have a raw min and a raw max. So basically we're going to go, okay, so we know that on most 0 to 150 is going to be 0.5 volts. It's going to be 0 PSI, and 4.5 is going to be 150. So if I put this 0.3, for example, which is going to be a failure mode, would be 0 volts in this situation, and I put this maybe 4.9. If I set that up there, when the sensor voltages go under or over these values, it'll ignore the sensor completely, and it'll only refer to your settings. So this is why when I go back to earlier, when I mentioned that getting this setting 100% correct is important, this is why. If you have a fuel pressure sensor fail, it'll default to this, and I'll use the fuel pressure expected. So basically it measures fuel pressure. It says this number against your map sensor, and it has a fuel pressure expected value. So the ECU will automatically calculate what the fuel pressure is if the sensor is not being read. So it'll ignore the sensor by using these diagnostic modes. You can do the same thing with the O2 sensor as well. The problem is that if it fails in the middle, it becomes an issue. So yeah, and on top of that, you can also have DCCs on top. But like if you keep this off, the DCCs off, it'll just ignore the sensor and not do an engine protection mode at the same time. So yeah, hopefully that one answers your question. It's pretty straightforward thing. I want to ask how you usually set up engine protection. Honestly, I just use default settings. I don't really touch them. I'll turn the boost down to 100% disable, to be honest. That's honestly about it. But like, I'll just turn the limiter on and just let it ride. Another silly question out of sheer curiosity. I was told that NA rotaries can handle more timing advance than turbo rotaries. What would you say is a safe zone? So, Gavin, to answer your question, as far as that, NA rotaries don't handle more ignition time than turbo rotaries. And that's loaded because the answer is that you're saying basically at different pressures is a different timing advance. So in a turbo rotary, you can run the same exact ignition advance at the same exact load as you can in an NA car. The problem is that when boost increases, temperature increases. When temperature increases, cylinder pressure increases. When cylinder pressure increases, you get an unstable burn. When you get unstable burn, you get knock. When you get knock, you get blown up engine. So we have to retard timing as boost goes up to compensate for the rising pressure to make the burn consistent. NA though, like you're never going to go over 0 pounds of boost. So 0 pounds of boost and a 0 pounds in NA, you run the same amount of timing, or you can. You don't necessarily do, but you can. So you don't run more timing or less timing. You just reduce timing as boost comes up. That's really the only thing that's different. So yeah, if your NA car could make boost, you wouldn't necessarily have to reduce timing, but it doesn't. So there's that. I will say that in our NA cars, for example, we have Ram air scoops in them that actually do generate positive manifold pressure. So we generate between 1 to 2 psi of manifold pressure purely from Ram air alone. So we do get increases. That being said, we don't need to decrease timing because the actual temperature of the air does not increase. This is why you look at things like, which is something I was ahead of the curve on, compressed air supercharging, which is something I was wanting to do for a while. You can run factory ignition timing. You can run NA ignition timing on compressed air supercharging because the temperature is so cold. You don't need to reduce timing to stabilize the temperature, stabilize the burn, because the temperature doesn't rise so much and the air doesn't go crazy. And that's with the dynamics how air works. So as air gets hotter, it expands. As air gets colder, it contracts. And it's a whole thing. I can go down the rabbit hole of that too. I would talk about that for another hour by itself. I asked because someone said advanced timing in an NA rotary until you stop making power. Yes, that actually is correct to an extent. And the other thing is too, on top of that, is where I'm talking about the turbo cars, where you don't want to over time the engine, where you don't want to, because it's dangerous. NA cars are not subject as much to blowing up from over advanced ignition timing, so you're fine there. However, gasoline cars definitely can go whatever. But if you're running ethanol in an NA car, you can go past MBT, and then the car stops making power. NA rotaries, you can pretty much get up there, pretty close to up to MBT on those cars and not really worry about knocking. We over advance, you do cause issues, but you can get pretty high up in timing, not worry about it. Turbo cars, like I said, because the risk becomes significantly greater as you get closer to MBT with a turbo car, it's not worth the risk to push it. NA cars on ethanol, for example, you can run 0 degree split and just run as much time as it makes to make power, and then once it stops making power, it's done. If you're on gasoline, you need a little more considerate there. This is where dyno is more important. You should be definitely using a dyno to find that. But most NA cars, 27, depending on the compression ratio, 26 to 30 is where they're going to end up generally, typically. A lower compression engine like an S4, 28 to 30, S5, you're going to end up around 26 to 27, typically. But yeah. Advan says, don't really gain much gains advancing ignition timing from MBT perspective. NA cars, you will gain pretty significant chunks, relatively speaking. NA cars, turbo, you don't. That's why you don't want to. NA, I did Adam LZ's car. I was helping with Adam LZ's car. They had their split at like 5 degrees and like super hard ignition timing. I think they ended up adding like another 6 or 7 degrees timing by itself, and it was 0 degree split, and it picked up like 30, 40 horsepower. But that's also relative to being a 4-rotor, bigger engine, more rotors, etc. That's obviously going to change, and the car is an ethanol, so it's not going to knock. So because we know it's not going to knock, you can push the timing beyond where it's supposed to actually be. Then EGTs start creeping up when you go beyond where you're supposed to be. So there's gives and takes there, etc. I see Dwight as well. By the way, go get some food. We appreciate your time. Yeah, I'm about to get food. I want to say thank you guys so much. It means a lot that so many people actually showed up to watch, etc. I think that it's really cool that we have such a thing. And I think that this is honestly just a statement of my personal behalf. I want to talk about myself for just a split second. Is that I think a lot of people, when they see posts and the drama and the bullshit the entire time, they see that, but they don't understand why I'm doing what I'm doing, how I'm doing what I'm doing, etc. So being able to do this and show, because like people think that I have an ulterior motive for doing whatever. I'm trying to promote my own business, etc. It's like I want to be very clear. I've taken $0 from anybody in the community the entire time. Tuned cars for $0. Haven't done anything. Haven't sold anything. Nothing. I purely did this out of love for the community. This is a hobby. This side of the cars is a hobby for me. I would like to take a step into tuning cars at this stuff for money, etc. And honestly, I'm taking that step now. That's what this whole thing is about. But the entire time I've taken $0. I've done nothing. I've just really been concerned about the way that particular people have been acting in the community. So I took the time to rectify that situation. So anyone that's had things negative to say, I understand 100% where you're coming from. I understand why you, whatever, 100%. I don't disagree with you. I think that you're right. So hopefully I can get back in the good graces of those who think that maybe I did whatever wrong or went overboard, whatever, do, etc. But this is a pretty clear. I just sat in here for 2.5 hours. effectively explaining everything without holding anything back the entire time, because I don't really care as far as information, because frankly I could tell you everything, and I'm just going to be honest, I don't think you're going to do it as good as me. And that's just the fact, because like at the end of the day, like tuning is not an art, it is a science. It is very direct, very clear, and truthfully, here's the one thing I'm going to leave with. I'll answer a couple questions after this, but my main point here is tuning cars is easy, diagnosing cars is difficult, and a big part of tuning cars is diagnosing and fixing cars. The numbers and stuff I just showed you is standard. Everyone should already know how to do this when they're tuning cars. Whenever you have a car being tuned for a year and a half and you go through 3 engines and your car doesn't start right, it doesn't idle right, it doesn't fucking drive right, that's a blatant mischaracterization of what should be done, because there's zero reason a car should not be able to do all those things correctly. And you should be, if you're a professional tuner, you should be able to effectively, easily be able to diagnose issues quickly and effectively, because what you're doing is time is money. You're wasting your time, but most importantly, you're wasting your customers' time. You're making them buy a ton of parts they don't fucking need, trying to hunt down an issue that you only have like a 5% confidence in, that you don't know for a fact. I could go on for that for a while. My frustration with the entire situation, to go back to the drama shit, is that every single person I talked to had the same exact story of, I had my car, it blew up, this was blamed for that, my car still doesn't do XYZ, I've been treating my car for years, he's told me to buy coils, he told me to buy plugs, like a car I'm just doing, literally spent $1,000 on plugs in a year. He's telling me to buy plugs, he's telling me that I need to buy new injectors, he's telling me I need a new turbo, he's telling me I need a new O2 sensor, and all these cars are being told this and that and this and that, and I've hopped on all these cars that are being told I need this and fixed them by the tune alone. So as a tuner, you should be able to immediately, clearly be able to diagnose when issue is mechanical, when issue is a tune. But if you don't know how to tune a car at a fundamental level, which is what I'm trying to show people how to do, if you don't know how to tune a car at a fundamental level, it is impossible to diagnose a car quickly. And if you can't do one, you can't do the other. And the fact you shouldn't be taking money if you don't know how to do both. So that's my rant as far as that goes. Why I am so annoyed with that particular individual, because it's a super common story. And yeah, Dwight's right. Especially if you're doing remote tuning, you have to be good at dyno. You're tuning a car sight unseen. And I'll just be honest, if you don't have a running race car, if you've never driven a race car, if your project's been going for 10 years and it's never started, you have no credence to be able to be tuning cars. No one should trust you to tune cars. As a customer, you are putting yourself in a world of hurt, because this person, legitimately, there is no ifs, ands, or buts about it. This person is using your money, your time, your car to learn how to tune a car. And you are putting your money, your time, everything of yours at risk for their benefit. Whereas from my perspective, I'm coming from a bit more. I race cars. I build cars, tune cars for a living. It's what I do every day in, day out, 9 to 5, Monday through Saturday. So, and the reputation's there. If you look past what I do, who I work for, our reputation as a company, etc., you're going to see that it's backed with experience, records, experience, etc. And even though I say the world record thing over and over again to kind of prove a point, and it sounds one way, it's just like, no, this is to prove that we do this. And we don't just do this, we do this at the highest level possible we can do it at. And it speaks volumes to be able to break records, etc. Whereas you're talking to someone who literally does not have a car that runs, that should be an obvious red flag for anyone that trusts or vouches for somebody. I've done speaking on that issue in particular, but that's my honest, straightforward, unfiltered, not a text message, not a joke, not a troll, opinion on the matter. Like it's infuriating to me. Honest, it does make me genuinely upset that someone can do that, and not only that, but be a cocky fucking dickhead asshole about it at the same time. That's that. Don't really get much gains. Blah, 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 blah. Another notification is, and I'm going to answer just these final questions here, and then I'm going to hop off because it is 10:30 and my stomach is growling. Is one of the reasons you can advance more with ethanol aside from... Another new question. Is one of the reasons you can advance more with ethanol aside from cooler burn temps because of higher octane? So 93 can be more advanced than 87. So Gavin, to answer your question, which is interesting, and I'm gonna help you here. The reason ethanol has a higher octane rating is because it burns cooler. Octane rating is the rating of how knock resistant a fuel is. The reason ethanol is knock resistant is because it has that cooling effect from the ethanol. It drops the temp. And because it does that, the burn is more consistent. So those two things you're talking about, you try to separate from each other, are actually directly interlinked between each other. So yes, you can run more timing for ethanol because it is higher octane. It is higher octane because it burns cooler. Those two things go together. So yeah, hopefully maybe learn something there. Yeah, well, cylinder temps. You helped me learn a ton much the past hour when finding a lot of this info is relatively very hard. Thank you very much. Yeah, no problem. Is there an RPM limit for our IGN-1A coils on a rotary in regards to dwell time? Yes, there is. So to go back to what I was talking about earlier, you might not have been here. Dwell time, IGN-1As are rated for 40% continuous duty and 80% max duty. So dwell time, you need to calculate duty cycle of dwell time. Dwell time is it's like dwell time divided by it's RPM divided by 600, and then times your dwell time. And you need to keep that number under 40% if you're doing like a road course car. And if you're doing like a drag racing car, street car, you can go with 80% and be fine. But if you overdwell, the car will start misfiring, and it will not be able to burn effectively. You'll overheat the coils and melt the coils, etc. So you need to keep it under that max rated duty and salt the taste based on your application. It's like I said, a street car, drag car, you can run it up to 80. And a car where you're running road course, lap after lap after lap at high RPM, you cannot do that. RPM is relevant to dwell time is relevant to RPM, etc. Very important that you have the understanding of how ignition duty cycle works. You need to keep the duty cycle in check. Thanks for that RPM limit. Cool. I love a Honda version of this. Yeah, Kyle, the plan is to do a Honda version of this. I'm producing the Humble channel as well. This is kind of a test run for that in particular. Last question here is going to be from the Japanese symbols guy, and then we're going to hop off here. So if you have thanks, go ahead and say it. I'm 20-second delay. Otherwise, I'm going to hop off right after this. Another question. I changed my throttle body drive-by-wire, and the S4 RX7 has the mechanical OMP. So I just left it disconnected, so it always runs like the throttle is closed. Can I disable throttle cut, disable decel cut? OMP, so I just left it disabled. Hold on like the throttle is closed. I mean, as long as you have lubrication inside the cylinder, as long as it's running like it is, you're going to be fine. That being said, I would recommend, honestly, at that point, with drive-by-wire, just pre-mixing and making your life way easier rather than leaving it up to what-ifs and experimenting and finding out whether or not it works or not and cooking your housings and seals and rotors and irons. I would just pre-mix the car at that point. You're already there. Like, you have 2 feet out the door, but you're not admitting you're out of the building. You might as well just get out of the building, to be honest with you. But yeah. So that's going to wrap it up here for me, you guys. If you're pre-mixing, you're fine. You can disable decel cut. Yeah, I think that's going to wrap it here. So thank you guys for watching. I had a great time answering all of your questions and really kind of educating and teaching, etc. I like that part a lot. I mean, that's, if you look at the history of my channel, it is based on education. My grandparents were educators, and then having the ability to spend years, past 10 years, doing this full time as a job, etc., and to be able to pass it on, especially being someone who had to figure it out on his own, to be able to help people out and do whatever, is sick. I really do like it. And the only thing, like I said, I'll ask, and this is going to be my own self promo, is I'm going to launch my website next week, mckeypower.com. If you don't have an ECU for your car, like a Haltech, or you need a turbo, etc., you can pick it up on my web store. I am a Haltech dealer, actually one of the biggest Haltech dealers in the country, specifically for Hondas. I'm trying to do rotary stuff as well. I'm wanting to make more stuff to empower people, that people stop being screwed over. It's my goal here solely is to empower people. So whether or not I make money in the situation isn't necessarily the main goal. Don't get me wrong. I would love to, stop doing Honda stuff, do full-time rotary, etc., do all that stuff. But that's not the requirement. It's not my 100% do or die situation. But if I can make enough to, make a living, do whatever, and continue to make stuff like this and continue to put this content out there for everybody to watch and learn, etc., and whatever, that's my end goal. My end goal is to make sure that you guys are empowered with information to understand how all this stuff works, so no one gets screwed out this community ever again, because I'm tired of seeing it. I've been around here long enough. I haven't always been active, but I've been around it enough to see the ins and outs, the scammers, the bad tuners, the drama, the arguments, the egos, the attitude. I've been around long enough. I'm fucking sick of it. So my goal is to get rid of it, and I'm doing it my way. To be honest, and this is my way of doing it. Not only am I was gonna put my money where my mouth is every single time, and that's the whole point of this as well. So we are 3 hours in, 2 hours 56 minutes 27 seconds with you guys. We had 80 people at one point in time. A ton of questions answered. Hopefully you guys learned a ton of information. If you guys could, after watching this, like, you know, leave a comment or make a post in the RX7 group about the whole seminar. If you could, I like to get more people in here, get more people talking about it. The more people we can educate, the better. So if you could, do me a big favor. Either comment on that post or even make your own individual post about the whole thing. I would really appreciate it. And then if you have any feedback, you could shoot me a DM on Facebook. I know I talk fast, but if there's anything else you want covered, I'll definitely take that in consideration and work towards future stuff. My end goal here is to make a top to bottom Haltech guide. That's why I did this live and asked people not to record it, because I am making actual full-on content regarding these same topics. I just want to kind of see what people want to know so I can know to naturally integrate that into the future, into the full videos. But I expect to do, I would say, at least 6 to 10 hours of educational content on tuning a Haltech from beginning to end, scratch, worked example, etc., everything. So that is a large undertaking. I'm doing it for $0. I'm doing it for free. There's a lot. So yeah, if you, like I said, I don't need donations. I don't need anything. Like if you need parts, even if it's not an ECU, even if it's not a turbo, I can usually get it. If you want to show appreciation, that's the way I would appreciate it at the most, but I don't need it. So don't feel obligated to do that. Just keep me in mind if you're ever needing anything, and I'll try to do my best to get you guys taken care of. But that's all we got for today, guys. I really do appreciate you guys jumping in here. And like I said, throw a post in the Facebook group if you could for me. I'd really appreciate it. Post in all the RX7 groups, the Reddit, whatever. Anything you could to get it out there for me would be great. And then Dwight, I'll leave it on this. He said, you convinced me to go buy a piece of shit RX8. I am sorry for your loss. I would have never recommended anyone buy an RX8. The chassis is great. The motor not so great, but it is what it is. And I'll have I have not mentioned this as well. I have an FCRX7, an S4 Turbo 2 car that is sitting in the garage behind me that I have not shown yet on YouTube, and I am going to be showing it relatively soon. So you guys are the first people to kind of know. I posted it out before, but I haven't talked about it. Car runs, drives, everything. Doesn't drive. I need to bleed the clutch and brakes, but I'll have a series on that car, and actually that's the car I'm using to actually do the live tuning stuff as well. So hope you guys like that stuff, man. I appreciate it. I might throw this up live. I don't care. We'll see. But I thank you guys for watching. Like I said, leave a comment for me if you could. I would really appreciate it on the RX7 groups. Leave your reviews in the RX7 groups. That way, like I said, get more people in this, get more people involved, get more questions. The more we can learn as a community, the better it'll be. So talk to you guys later. Have a good one, guys.